Ms. Freund, or
I defer to Ms. Freund on this.
You're good to go, Mr. Chairman.
we are good to go. All right. Thank you, member. We'll come back to order. Thank you for your work this morning. This afternoon, we have numerous state agencies here. The first two, well, I guess two of the ones this afternoon are agencies that we have been designated their home committee for. So what we're going to get today is some updates on a couple of things. One, we've requested in the past, the state leasing, and then they also wanted to give us the recruitment retention compensation update or information based on what was put in the governor's budget and then subsequently considered by the Joint Appropriations Committee. So with that, Director Bach and Mr. Coleman, you're all on. Take it away. That's your pleasure.
Thank you very much, Chairman Barlow, Vice Chairman Boner, and committee. My name is Patricia Bach, and I'm the director for A&I. And as the chairman said, you are our home committee, which is a fairly new assignment, which is nice. We have not had a home committee for as long as I can remember. So in the last couple of years, we've been very happy to have management audit as our home committee, and we're kind of figuring out what that role is. So hopefully you can tell us what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong when it comes to that. I'm here with quite a few folks from A&I. We are on the agenda to talk about leasing and compensation package. To my left is Andrew Coleman. He is the GSD administrator. He is the one who will be generally talking about the leasing program and that update. Behind me is Russ Noel, deputy director. We also have Matt Simpson, who is the leasing supervisor or program manager. And also Nicole Brommer. She is a fairly new hire to work with Matt and Andrew on the leasing program. So we have some depth if there's questions that we can't answer up here. Behind them are Aaron Williams, HRD administrator, and Jaron Hansen, program administrator for HR. So again, depth for questions on the compensation package that the governor has put out. Over on the other side is Rory Horsley. She is our CEO, and then Aaron Edwards, which is our risk manager.
Thank you.
Now that the introductions are done. We did submit kind of a PowerPoint that I know you have a copy of. So for those of you who are new on the committee, kind of explains a little bit of what A&I does. Like ETS, we are an enterprise agency. So we don't have a state park to talk about. We don't have a hospital to talk about. We have people. We have the care of buildings and grounds. We have benefits. We have economic analysis. So a lot of the things that are not necessarily, I always joke with Darren Westby that he has the fun agency, and then we have A&I. So we don't have one of those type of agencies where we can point to a park or where our money is going. What we have is the backbone of how state government or funding state government. So if you have any more questions about that, I can certainly talk to you offline so that we don't go through the PowerPoint and have everybody listen to the same thing. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to leasing, turn over to the leasing question, and Andrew Coleman with General Services Division.
Thank you. Please, just for the committee. So the question was, do we want a kind of an overview, general overview of the agency? And I think we've been interacting with the agency long enough to understand probably enough. You have broad questions, we can certainly take those, but we had two specific questions, one specific question for the agency, and then they wanted to bring something to us. And so I just said, let's just go straight to that. If there's broader questions, we can certainly back up. They're not off the table, but let's go to what was of interest to us at our last meetings. So Mr. Coleman, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Andrew Coleman. I'm the General Services Administrator. We provided you a number of documents ahead of the meeting today of discussing leasing and providing you some updated information on it. And I think we've done our best to try and answer your questions from the last meeting. I guess I'll start by just kind of going over those documents, the attachments to the memo that we provided. starting with attachment 1, the A&I program history. This is some data that was compiled before my time, but it's data that kind of shows the total square footage of A&I's leasing program, the amount of leases over time, the average cost per square foot, information like that, and shows that since 2007, for instance, we've decreased leases by 68 leases to a current total of about 175. So that's sort of kind of some overview information for you all, and I can turn to the next attachment unless there's any other questions. Any questions on that? Attachment 2 was our leasing summary. This is a compiling of all the agencies, and it shows the total square footage, the number of leases that each agency has, the annual rent for that agency, and the average cost per square foot. This data is taken directly out of another table that I'll get to that's got more specifics, but this shows you at a high level what those agencies have. There's some nuance when you get into the details. For instance, military department has a rather large amount of rent, but a large chunk of that is tied up with a lease that we have for the guard base on the airport here in Cheyenne. It's not really square footage, it's really for land. So we haven't factored that into the average cost per square foot there. Is there a question? Okay. On the second page of attachment 2, we tried to provide some information about kind of pie charts showing sort of what the makeup is. And as you'll notice on the first chart, there are 4 agencies that make up the majority of our leasing program. And actually, some of those are also included in the others. There are some, when we have a multi-agency lease, A&I usually is the one that has named as that. And so in the later charts, you'll see a later report. Oftentimes those will include things like workforce services or health or corrections. And the bottom one then shows the rent and the makeup as far as the percentages of what's going in from our budget to these various leases.
Might have a question here on either attachment 1 or appendix 1 or appendix 2, however you're referring to. Senator James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's actually on overall question. Do you ever look at how many employees are actually taking up this number, the space as well? I noticed in some places like the Board of Medicine, they don't have very many employees on Board of Nursing and stuff like that. They have like 10 or less, but yet between the two, they're paying almost $200,000 a year. And so, do you ever take things like that into account where we could save, that amount of money and put them somewhere else? Thank you.
Mr. Coleman, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, Senator James, we do look at the amount of employees that each agency has. As far as converting that to like an employee per square foot calculation can be difficult sometimes. A lot of the leases we may have different storage requirements for different agencies. For instance, we have a storage lease that's for the military department up in Casper. There's other ones that we are sometimes constrained by the building that we're in. And so we try to find the square footage that fits an agency when we move them in. But because we're going into existing space, sometimes offices are a little larger, a little smaller than they might be between different properties. But we do take it into account, the amount of agencies we have or the amount of employees we have in the different buildings. And we do try to look to make sure that we are not, I guess, paying for more space than we need.
Please proceed. Representative Gregg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This $1,600 lease at the Department of Audit, what's the nature of that? Do you know what that is?
So first of all, maybe if you would reference what exhibit you're looking at, and if they're not to that one yet, maybe let them get to that exhibit before we get there.
Well, I think we're on that exhibit. It's exhibit 2, the agency by agency
Okay,
update.
I don't know. You didn't reference where you were, so I don't know that.
Okay.
So that first is helpful. So-
I'm just wondering, $1,600 per year, maybe it's really good value. Do you know what the nature of that is? Is that
And obviously, this is getting into details that may not be readily at your fingerprint, so fingertips. So if you do know that, that would be great. If it's something that is not readily available, you can let us know that too and follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will go ahead and direct the committee to attachment number 4, which has more information about the individual leases. In particular, for the Department of Audit lease, I believe it's on page 3 of attachment 4, right at the top. And it appears that Department of Audit lease is for one of the leases up in Casper, and I believe that is actually a lease that will be disappearing once the Thyra Thompson building comes online and we move into there, which I will get into more detail on attachment 3 here in a moment, but that actually shows what leases are going away and which ones are staying. As an overview for attachment 4, and then also this kind of carries on to attachment 5, those both contain the same information. They're simply organized differently. And I think we tried to do that in response to some of the comments we had at the last meeting from the committee of the attachment 4 is based on the agency. It shows every lease that we have for each agency that's active. And then attachment 5 is the same information, but it's sorted by the community. So you can see how many leases we have in Jackson or Casper, et cetera. I will mention one thing, that just the formatting of it. In the upper right hand, if you're looking at the table, there's a cost per square foot line at the end. And that is actually an average cost per square foot. So we have the total square foot for the agency, the annual rent, and then the average cost per square foot. That's what those terms are. We just didn't fit average into that title line. I guess if there's any questions on these two attachments, I can pause on that, and then I'll take us back to attachment 3.
Representative Brown, please.
Andrew, just a quick question. You mentioned early in your testimony that we've reduced by 68. Is it anticipated for this committee to understand that you're going to continue to look at reducing these? And the reason I ask this is because I remember, boy, it's been a long time ago. I believe it was underneath Governor Meade, that there was an expressed outward, hey, let's try to help some of these communities, some of these smaller businesses that may have some of this area open. We've got the money as a state. Let's try to rent some of these places. And so there was a plethora of this moving out to try to support small businesses in the state. And we're now trying to start to claw that back. When I look at $11 million, it's a chunk of money, but it's a drop in the bucket compared to what the rest of the state is. Is it still anticipated that you guys are going to continue to remove leases when their expiration dates are up and then putting them into state-owned facilities? Is that ultimately the goal here?
Mr. Coleman.
Mr. Chair, Representative Brown, that is part of the goal. We are working on reducing our leasing budget, and some of the things that we're looking at is where we have underutilized state space, either owned or leased, trying to combine leases or move agencies out of leases into state space. And so, but most of our focus has been on Casper and also in Cheyenne. We're aware that a lot of the smaller communities, changes in lease space is probably a bigger effect on the local community. So most of what we've been focusing on has been kind of larger things down here. And actually, that's a good segue into attachment 3. Any other questions? Attachment 3 is focusing entirely on Casper. And this was a request I know the committee had for some information about details on what's going to happen for the leasing program when the new state office building opens up there at the beginning of, around the beginning of March. So this list, the first section is, and I guess I'll say all of the information from this table is taken out of the other tables, so it's all consistent. The first section is all of the agencies and leases that will be moving. The second section is all of the leases that we are anticipating will stay and are not moving into the new building. And then there's actually a lease on the second page that the livestock board determined they no longer needed. And so we were able to just end that lease. There's also some information on the second page that shows the total square footage as far as how much is staying, how much is moving, as well as the total annual rent, how much is staying, how much is moving. And then those totals are reflected as well. There's one edit I did want to make the committee aware of to some of the data on the first page. And it's for the pari-mutuel lease. There was a change that happened this last year where they needed to double their square footage due to taking on more staff. And we did not get that recorded into the database. The annual rent number is correct. The annual square footage, rather than that being 1,920 square feet, it's actually 3,942. And that changes then the cost per square foot for that lease to be $10.95. So I wanted to make you aware of
So
that.
that's the parimutuel commission that was the gaming commission. That's now the parimutuel commission again?
I believe so.
Yeah, okay, just checking. Thank you.
And I think we'll get to change the name possibly after the next session.
Potentially,
Again.
potentially we'll do it again.
Yeah.
All right, please proceed, Mr. Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So kind of staying on the topic of Casper, that's been a major focus of the leasing program. And A&I's General Services Division overall, we're looking forward to taking control and operating the building, moving agencies in. Our move coordinator, who's also within the leasing section, Jackie Knighton, has worked tremendous work over the last several months, many months, with agencies getting well ahead of the issue, planning for packing, making arrangements for how the offices will be situated. We've secured movers for the move, and also have been working with our surplus property section to identify where there's property that could be sold for the state. And oftentimes I think we're able to sell that actually on site without having to haul it down to Cheyenne due to the online auction website that we use. So that's been a large focus for leasing, and I think they've been good work, and we're getting, I think, on track. There will be about 317 employees that will be moving into the Thyra Thompson building. And our anticipated schedule, now that we have movers secured, is about 6 weeks of moving, starting the very first week of March. Actually, I think it's February 28th on that Monday. And then we'll be moving on for about 6 weeks. Weather dependent, of course, as everything in Wyoming is around the spring. But that's our schedule right now. I also wanted to then mention we've released and gotten some proposals back on an RFP for building management services. So this will be for a contractor in Casper who will provide custodial services, some basic maintenance services, snow removal, and some overall building management operations like you might be familiar with from other building managers in kind of the private sector. So we're evaluating proposals right now and looking forward to getting someone on board for that for the opening of the building. We're also looking ahead towards a ribbon cutting ceremony for the building, and we're anticipating that will take place in April. There will be more news coming on that as we make further plans and get a date locked in. Applications going out on that. And then there's lastly to, oh,
Apparently that's how you got to get the attention of the chairman anymore. You got to send your dog in. So go ahead and finish your thought, and then we'll get to Senator Guru.
okay. Well, Mr. Chair, I actually was going to talk on a slightly different issue in Casper.
Okay, so Senator Guru, call off the dogs. What can we do for you?
Sorry about that, Mr. Chairman. I would just want to go back and ask about that contract work, and if Mr. Coleman, if you anticipate, given the issues that we're having in Cheyenne with employees and all that, if you anticipate that being something that you might be able to replicate, and just looking at the overall cost, is how that could possibly pan out, or maybe even be something you could do, like say going forward in Cheyenne and other places. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Coleman. I think the question probably is in Casper, you're considering, or you're looking for contractors to do that. Is that something that also might be a possibility in Cheyenne? I.e. instead of having a state employees contracting some services. Is that accurate, Senator Guru?
Yes, sorry. Yes.
Thank you.
Chairman.
Director Bach.
Chairman, Senator Gru, I'm going to jump in quickly here because I want to make sure that it is certainly a possibility. It's something we could look at. We're actually looking a little bit at the reverse to see in the next 18 months or so, once this RFP is in place, to see how much that costs versus what it would cost for us to have somebody on site, a state employee living in, or multiple state employees living in Casper. So we are doing the reverse. And I think through that process, we could also be looking at exactly what Senator Gru is talking about. I would say it would, I would guess that it would be more expensive, but I don't know that direct answer. So that's exactly what we're looking at up in Casper. It's just the reverse to see what the cost is.
Okay, thank you very much. Please continue, Mr. Coleman.
Mr. Chairman, and I'll add that the approach for using a contractor was based on some initial investigation A&I made. This is going to be the only building that A&I maintains up in Casper. And so the scale of what we would need to have maintenance folks and custodial folks on hand in town is a little different than what we have down here. But we have evaluated that, and that's our plan, is to evaluate it as the contract goes forward, as we get used to how operating the building is going to go, regular expenses, demands. We'll be able to evaluate whether we need to change the approach or whether it's working and we can keep going forward beyond about the first 18 months or so.
Okay, thank you. So I have an inquiry, just since we're talking about the Casper just a minute. The total square footage of the offices that are moving are almost 80,000 square feet. What is the square footage that they're actually moving into in the new state building? If you don't have an answer, that's fine at the moment, but I'm just curious what we're replacing 1.2 million. How much square footage are they going into? Just for later, for another time. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Chair, I think I can answer that. It's about 127,000 square feet is the new building. It will also include, and I think this is important to note, 2 office buildings that are currently state-owned in downtown Casper. That was just going to give some more information on that Workforce Services has been maintaining and staying in. Those will be vacated, and so it's not just 84,000 going into 120,000. It's folks in 2 state-owned buildings also going into the larger building.
Okay, thank you.
On those 2,
Representative Gray might have another question. Mr. Coleman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What is the status of the Chancery Court on the top floor? And if they ended up sharing that with the district court, have you thought about that? Because that is a proposal that some have talked about, is the Chancery Court being shared with the creation of a new district court judge in Natrona County, which is a bill that's coming before the legislature. And if you shared those, how much space would that vacate? And what is the plans on the Chancery Court? Is that just going to be vacant until that moves in? Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Gray. We haven't really been involved as far as the different discussions of where the Chancery Court would be housed if it's not housed inside the new building. I believe as far as the finishes in the building there in the Chancery Court, I think they're almost done. We were up there a few weeks ago, and it's pretty well finished in that area. I think that was one of the last areas that they were working on. So maybe some additional work they're finishing, but most of the offices are in place. The courtroom is in place. It looks very nice. As far as my understanding of when the move-in would be, I think we probably have the same information that, and maybe less than you all have, as far as, I think we were looking about 2 years before there would be a occupancy that would be, a permanent judge in that location with his staff. I anticipate that, I guess I've anticipated, and this is just personally, that the court may want to take use of that over time now with the judges that are filling in before they have a permanent one. They may want to hold hearings in there. And so I am not aware of that at this point, but I believe that at least the space is largely finished.
Thank you. And just to follow up on that, when I attended the district court conference the other day, there was some update, and I think the Chief Justice will have that maybe during your State of the State, where they are with some of that, but certainly follow up with the judiciary be for the Chancery Court particular issue as far as where they are in that planning process.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and appreciate that. I think we have this bill to create a new district court judge in Natrona, and the Chancery Court, that it's not clear what the demand is. They have one active case right now. And so I was thinking we could combine the two and create that new district court judge and put that in charge of the Chancery Court until there's enough demand for it to be justified. And anyway,
And
it's
that may be, I don't know where
Yeah.
that process is.
Yeah,
I don't have.
thank you.
Thank you. Representative Stiver, sorry. Would you like to borrow Representative Gray's microphone?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is, Cheyenne and Casper are the only two places we're paying for parking. And just wondering why.
Mr. Coleman. First, where is the parking or what kind of structure it is or whatever? 'Cause I didn't look at that kind of detail, and then why, I guess, is the next question. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Stiver, the parking in Cheyenne, one of the locations I know is located near the Emerson Building, which is an old school downtown on Capitol, and does not have, it's certainly not built the way that they would a current school with lots of parking around it. And so we've leased a small, very small lot about a block away that employees are able to go and use. And that's just because the amount of folks that we want to maintain in that building is just larger than the parking, or is more than what we have available parking immediately, and it's certainly not, I think, state-owned. As for the other parking leases, I know that we have one in Casper, I believe, and I think that's due to some extra, some special parking that is in I believe an adjacent building to the lease that uses it. It's for overflow. And I'm not familiar with that one as much.
Chairman.
Go ahead,
Chairman Barlow, if I may.
Director.
Representative Stivar, that was one of my questions as well. When I'm looking at leases and instead of moving people, can't we just get rid of the parking leases? That was one of my questions. And when you start looking at it, the very few parking lot leases we have, and I'll use the Emerson as an example, because I used to be in the Emerson. All around the Emerson, we're close enough to the downtown part that it's 2-hour parking everywhere. So, and I will out myself on this one. We would get tickets because we were in meetings and we couldn't move our vehicles. And I did get booted at one point because I saved up my tickets and paid them at the end of the month. So that's one of the reasons, and it's a very small parking lot by the Emerson. I believe there's 12 spaces. There might be a little bit more. It was simply to help the employees not have additional money expended going to work every day. So we have a couple parking spots, and the ones we've looked at makes sense. We have been asked, obviously, to have parking elsewhere. We generally don't do that. So the parking that we do have is usually in an area where the employees can't park anywhere nearby, or they have to go all the way down to the Pioneer lot garage and then walk all the way back to town. That's their option. So I will say I looked at that concern as well. That was one of the first things I looked at. Well, what parking do we have? We can get rid of that. And it's very difficult to get rid of the few that we have.
Representative Stiver, a follow-up?
So my understanding is one in Cheyenne there at 1716 Thomas, that's only 12 spaces?
Director, I think what the testimony was, there's only 12 spaces associated with the Emerson building. So they needed additional parking at another location. Director, is that how you represented it?
Correct. And I will turn it over to Andrew on the name of the parking lot lease for the Emerson, which is the smaller lease. I'm not sure which one is it, Thomas.
Go ahead, Mr. Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The lease we were discussing for the parking next to the Emerson is actually the lease for 112 West 19th Street. That's the lease that is used for Emerson. I'm not very familiar with the Tomes Avenue one, which is used by the Board of CPAs. I'll admit I'm not familiar with that particular lease.
Okay, Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is probably for either one of you, but I can remember back underneath the previous mayoral administration here in Cheyenne, there was an agreement specifically for state employees in the downtown area and specifically around the Emerson building, where they were giving out certain passes, certain allotment of passes for parking passes in that area, and it was costing ANI a certain amount. Has there been any discussions, as opposed to paying for a leasing on a parking lot? Has there been any continued conversations with the new mayoral group? And I get it, you know, every single time you have to turn around every 4 years and either go negotiate for a parking area where we can just save it. But my thought is if we can get something in an MOU and put some people down there with some parking passes, that might alleviate the constraints as well. I'm just curious if there's been any discussions with the mayor of Cheyenne.
Go ahead, Director, or
Chairman-
Mr. Coleman.
Chairman Barlow, Representative Brown. Originally, when I believe it was under prior to Mayor Orr, and maybe during her tenure, we did get an agreement with the city to remove the 2-hour parking signs on the south and north side of the Emerson. So when I look at it, the front of the Emerson still had 2-hour parking. We did attempt to talk with them about having passes of some sort to say, these are state employees that are working in this building, and have it on their dash. That did not come to fruition with that, the mayor then. I do not think there have been discussions since with the new mayor. So that is something we could probably look at.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I'll take us back north to Casper for one last item regarding the 2 buildings that Workforce Services is vacating. They're located at 246 South Center Street and 100 Midwest Avenue, which if you think of Casper on a food map, puts them on either side of the Ribbon Chop House and the House of Sushi. So
Thank you for those references.
yeah, so probably can place it now.
This is not an advertisement. We are not.
No, sir, merely for location purposes. The recommendation from these, and they've been looked at before even the Casper office building was built, is that the cost of repairing them and bringing them up to standards to be usable in the long term is more than is worth to the state. And so the recommendation the ANI has made to the state building commission was to go ahead and move forward on selling those properties. And we received approval at the last meeting to begin that process, which will begin with an appraisal of those 2 properties. So we'll find out what the appraised value is and then kind of move on from there. I believe that's all I had for the Casper updates. Our memo, going back to our memo that we provided, it also included a couple of items that were some smaller questions.
I guess before we leave Casper, we need one more Casper question. Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So what's the plan to negotiate and to make sure the state taxpayer, we get our value there on those properties? I mean, have we got a negotiating team in place or a plan? I mean, obviously, we're in a public meeting. I know you don't want to, but are we gonna, we want to make sure we don't do some fire sale kind of situation. Have you got a plan?
So maybe just walk through what the process is, and the State Building Commission actually makes that determination. So maybe go through at the high level what that would be for the committee, please.
Mr. Chair, generally the process starts with the appraisal piece, and that's our information gathering to make sure we know about the value of the property. We know about value of the property in comparison to the market in Casper. That's the information gathering. On a high level, then it would go back to, after we evaluate that, would go out for a request for bids or RFPs, I believe. And then that ultimately will come to the State Building Commission for a determination on that. I guess it's sort of the high level piece right now. And right now we're just on step 1.
And what kind of timeline would you anticipate for this information gathering to subsequently maybe having some offers and the commission taking an action?
Mr. Chair, right now we're looking at, I think we still have an RFP we're going to issue out for the appraisal services. And from kind of just initially looking into it, we're looking at a few months or at least a couple months for the appraisal to take place. And then after that, we would need to move forward on the advertising of the building. And so I guess I don't have a particular timeline, but it's going to take a while.
So end of the year would probably be an early potential estimate. Okay. Representative Gray, any follow-up? Yeah. No? Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it. And if you get your appraisal back in 60 days, I want that appraiser's number. I'm just saying right now. Because appraisers right now are like auditors, folks. They are in demand and they are hard to find. I've got 2 appraisers that I'm waiting, appraisals I'm waiting on right now. And it's more than 60 days. So thank you.
Mr. Chair, we had a couple other items in our memo I provided to the committee that just addressed some of the specific questions that the committee had. One of them is on the workforce service offices on Yellowstone Road here in Cheyenne, and it's an 18-year lease with an option for a 9-year extension. We're a few years into that lease. The annual cost is about $18.50 a square foot, and there's an escalating clause per year of about 2%, which is fairly normal with a lot of other leases that we have currently, and I think was consistent with what was on leases that Department of Workforce Services vacated when they consolidated into that building. We did look into that. On another note, there was a question about whether or not litigation over the 2020 carry offices that were used by the elected officials during the capital project, if that litigation had been settled, and it was settled in February of 2020.
Somebody at the far end had a question first. Senator Bouchard, was that your hand? Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Please proceed.
My question about that is, I can't find anything about it. Was this all done behind a non-disclosure? I mean, because this has been something that has come up in conversations around the state, starting way back when it was happening. We had people coming to us that were harmed. So I would just like to know, is there a way we can see that, what actually happened in that whole case and how it was litigated and how they settled?
So to be clear, you're talking about the 2020 carry one? Okay, sorry, I didn't know which one you're referring to. So Mr. Coleman?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Bouchard, we can look into that and find what information is disclosable. And if there is any restrictions on that, I don't know, but we can work. I think we'll probably need to talk with the AG's office.
Okay, thank you.
More there.
So Ms. Bodewins, would you just make a note that that's something we'll be expecting to at least have some communication from the agency on? I think Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the follow-up on these questions. A lot of times, sometimes questions get lost in the ether from 4 or 5 months ago. So I appreciate you going through the tape or writing them down and following up with them on the memo. I do appreciate that. On the Cheyenne one, the $1.5 million on Yellowstone. Last time, I think the director said they were going to look at this, and there's been a lot of questions on this. Representative Brown had a few comments that you were going to go back to the AG and see what wiggle room maybe there is. Obviously, has there been any communication on that, or is the intention of the department to move forward with this through, what is it, 2037 or I think? Thanks.
Right, Director.
Chairman Barlow, Representative Gray. The intention is for the department to stay in that building. You're talking about the Yellowstone building. And I guess, there is the only out that we have in that lease is for budgetary purposes. So if we are in a situation with Department of Workforce Services or the state not being able to pay the lease, then we can discuss getting out of that lease. That is not, if you look at our leases, our new leases, there's always a termination clause. This one unfortunately doesn't have that. And I want to make sure that everybody's aware that was before Andrew's time, that was before my time. So it is certainly a building that we can utilize even more than we're utilizing today. One of the options that we have trying to work on leases is to put more people in that building, not less, and getting out of it. So the square footage rate is not bad. The terms I know are an issue. I believe they're an issue for a lot of folks to have a 19-year lease. So what we're trying to look at is the best way to use that lease and utilize and have enough people in there to utilize the lease to the best of its ability right now. That's our intention, to try to keep that lease and use it as much as we can. Does that answer your question?
Some great.
Okay.
Thank you. Excuse me. Senator James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So are we ensuring that whoever has negotiated these contracts never come within 100 yards of another contract negotiation again?
I don't know that, yeah, that's more of a comment maybe, but go ahead, Director, if you want to respond.
Chairman Barlow, Senator James, we are taking, the leasing program has changed dramatically since then. I would say that the AG's office is very diligent in making sure that their example contracts or example leases are being utilized. So I think there are stopgaps now in place between ANI and the AG's office to not have something like that occur again.
Further questions? Senator Guru, thank you for waving.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make a quick comment because I too have been critical of the leasing program. And I know Director Bach, you and I've talked about this a lot in other venues, other meetings. And I just want to say I've been quite gratified at the new approach that your group has taken in trying to make sure that we get the best value for lease. I know that I personally am in a lease where I pay $42 a square foot, and I did so willingly, and I make money at it. And so, you know, my eyes were wide open. But when we're talking about state dollars, we know that that's a little bit different story, and try to get, you know, every lease is different. Every story is a little bit different. Situational things happen. But I know that and appreciate that you all are doing your best to ensure that things like that don't happen again. Those long-term leases with escalators that put us in a bad spot. So when we're talking to our constituents, so I just want to let you know I appreciated it. Thank you.
Okay, Representative Brown, or Representative Gray, sorry. I saw Representative Brown move for his computer and then Representative Gray, please
Thank you,
go.
Mr. Chairman. What is the narrative on the Douglas and Gillette, this quite high per square footage? It's two offices, both the leaseor is RJH Enterprises with pretty high cost per square foot, both of those. Do you know the narratives on those two sites? And they're leased by ANI also, or they're the agency that's listed.
Mr. Chairman.
Certainly, go ahead. When you found it, proceed as you're ready.
Thank you, sir. Representative Gray, I think I am not familiar with those particular leases in detail, so we can go and get that information. I will say that by having it be a ANI lease, I believe those are multi-state, multi-agency leases. So those would be multiple agencies within that particular lease. Another example would be there's one in Rock Springs that houses probably I think 7 or 8 agencies in it. And that's listed as ANI, but we can get more information about those two leases.
So I guess I could just, on Running Drive, the one in Gillette, I think that has 3 or 4 different state agencies in it. It has workforce services in it. It has like DFS maybe in it. It has several agencies in it. It's a very large, or at least to me, yeah, it's 24,000 square feet. It's a pretty large office building. And in Gillette, I don't know when this lease was put, office space is pretty limited. So it was actually a new, if I recall right, it was a new building that they leased probably from its inception, from the day it was opened. The state probably did, but it has multiple agencies in it. I am confident about that. I don't know about the one in Douglas, even though it's probably in my district. I can't, by the address, Senator Boner may know, but I don't. Senator Boner.
Well, Mr. Chairman, yeah, that's probably a little bit more follow-up because if you Google the address, it comes up as a fast food restaurant. I'm assuming that's not correct. So Yeah, just a
Well,
little bit. And,
There might be multiple agencies there in any one day.
anyway, so yeah, just I look forward to receiving that follow-up information.
Yeah, follow up on that would be great. Appreciate it. Representative Stiver.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Family Services at 1510 Pershing Boulevard here in Cheyenne. Correct me if I'm wrong, but is that lease just sitting out there and we've got to just let it run out? I don't believe they're still using that building.
Go ahead, Mr. Coleman.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Stiver, the space that we had originally leased was also including the Workforce Services Department had about 2/3, I think, of our original lease space was taken up by them. DFS was then about the remaining third, and I think they're actually on kind of the side north of Pershing, so the side that you don't see when you drive by on Pershing. We did reduce that lease once Workforce Services moved out. So we are only leasing the amount of space that DFS is occupying now. And I know that I believe the owner is looking for advertising that space for lease by others, the area that we vacated. But DFS is in that space currently. And I believe it houses, for instance, I think their local district office.
Good, thank you. There's a lot of details in here. You guys do your homework and maybe reach out to the different to the office and get any of those follow-ups that you need. Anything else? All right. Carry on then, please. More presentation. I think you maybe came to the end of your memorandum, which is associated with the exhibits or attachments, excuse me. For leasing, anything else?
Mr. Chair, I guess if there's any questions on the remainder of the memo, we did provide some information about leasing processes as far as our leasing group is, as they've come on board, we've tried to improve some of those, and we're going to keep working on that. The State Building Commission recently approved their rules, and that's been a ongoing process. And so we're looking forward to those getting signed. And the part of those is to allow us to do some of the more policies officially for leasing. And so we'll be working on those. But unless there's any other questions, I didn't have anything else.
Okay, so there's a few specific follow-ups that we asked for, and then members, if you do have something that you want to follow up on out of these materials, let's try to do it in the next week or so that hopefully the department can have one response back to us that covers both broad questions that came up in the committee and then anything that might have come out of your individual curiosity. So let's at least try to, if you have questions, try to get them forwarded to the director or Ms. Bodewins, who can forward them to the director in a timely manner. All right, Director. So what's next on your agenda or our agenda, or your agenda on our agenda?
Chairman Barlow, I'd like to bring Aaron Williams up to go over quickly the compensation package. I know there have been questions, and as management audit being our own committee, we were not concerned, but we thought maybe you would receive questions from the body, knowing that ANI is the committee under audit. So we thought we'd try to help you out with questions and answers. And if we can do anything more, if we can submit one pager, or we have a couple one pagers with the joint appropriations committees, we can copy you on that as well. So that at least you have a basic understanding of what this looks like. It is a complicated issue.
Yep, thank you very much. So I think Representative Brown has a real quick question before you launch into that, Ms. Williams.
Thank you. This is going to make you earn those JD letters behind your name. I am kind of curious what this, you may not be able to answer this directly today, but what I will tell you is in the past couple of weeks, I've been receiving quite a few emails from state employees, not in their official capacity as their state employee at a wyoming.gov email, but rather from their home email address, specifically outlining, hey, my pay is X. This is what it was when I started here. I'd really appreciate the support. And then I've also received a few phone calls saying, I'd like to say this, but I'm scared to say it because I feel like I've been told I'm not allowed to lobby. And I'm curious what ANI's stance on this is, and what the stance on the allowance of a state employee to approach a legislator on their individual time, because when it involves something such as their individual pay versus them lobbying on behalf of a bill for their agency, I think those are two very distinct separations. But I would like to know publicly, what is ANI's stance on allowing a state employee to approach a legislator, specifically their own, to get some information on this? Because I think there's a severe disconnect of what's going on right now.
Chairman Barlow,
Please proceed. Director.
Representative Brown, it's an excellent question, and I get that question too. And the first thing I say is you need to talk to the AG's office, or their director needs to talk to make sure they're in their individual, coming at a constituent level. Talking to, they have to be able to talk to their representative or their senator. So I would say when they go in and talk on in the individual capacity, saying, hey, this is what's happening as my representative, can you help me with this? That is very different than me standing here in front of a committee saying, I don't think I'm paid high enough and I need to be paid more. That's very different. And we are very careful. We're probably overly careful in ANI, especially the people who are testifying. So one of the issues is when you have, the way I look at it, and I would say, once again, talk to the AG and make sure that we get that. And we can get that interpretation as well. So if you want me to do that, I can do that as well.
I would appreciate that.
Okay. And what I would say is that it's very different when you have a manager testifying in front of a committee saying, here's why I can't recruit. That's not lobbying as far as we look at. That is saying, these are the problems we have. You've heard, and if you've listened to the JC, you've heard every director come up and say, I can't hire, I can't retain, and these are my problems. The same goes for the managers. Now, when that manager comes to you as Joe and says, you know, it's awful. I can't, even in my position, I can't work here. And this is blah, blah, blah. I think that's very different. And I will talk with the AG and see if we can get a little more clarification on that. But I would say that there's a very different, two very different issues. Lobbying on behalf of an agency or for the pay's hard. That's the one where it's going to come up more than anywhere else, is that people are passionate about it one way or the other. So I will get that information and as quickly as I possibly can and get it to you. Yeah.
So just as a follow-up to that, Director, I think while that is interesting information to us and insightful, it's probably be nice if the employees of the state of Wyoming actually understood that nuance, if there is a nuance in that as well. Because, I mean, I'm getting emails as well, and I respect them. They're my constituents. I know some of them personally. I say, thank you very much. You know, we'll take it up, attend to it as an issue. I'm not personally offended by it because they're my constituents, but I do think that if, to Representative Brown's point, if folks are feeling this tension, whether I can or cannot say anything, it would be nice for, you know, for all parties to kind of have a clear understanding of, you know, what the rules of the road or, you know, what is appropriate and what maybe is not. So,
Chairman Barlow,
please.
I would also say that the AG's office puts out a memo every year about lobbying, and it goes to all state employees. So they've been pretty diligent about making sure that they know essentially what not to do, what lobbying is. So I can't remember exactly what's in that memo. And AG Hill is probably yelling at the screen right now if she's watching. But I know that that memo goes out, and there's probably one coming out momentarily. So that'll go out to all state employees. Every year they do that. So I will make sure I at least get a copy of that to you and then talk with her on a personal level as well on how we can make that clear.
Okay, thank you very much. Senator James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So looking at one of the documents that we got, pay is actually one of the bottom three reasons that keep employees working for the state. So it's actually, according to state employees, not that important. Benefits are, but actually retirement, to be more specific, but pay is actually not that important. I was wondering if you might be able, I wonder why everyone keeps focusing on pay and giving pay raises when to them, it's actually not that important. So I was wondering if you might be able to expand on that, please.
Chairman.
So
Barlow.
maybe go into your presentation and that'll be part of what's presented, I think, sounds like. So Director, however you'd like to proceed.
Chairman Barlow, thank you. Senator James, I'm going to turn it over to Aaron and Jared, and they're going to go through the survey. They can talk about that specifically as well.
Please proceed.
Chairman Barlow, Senator James, that's an excellent question. I think one of the main reasons the Human Resources Division is here advocating for salary increases is just the increase in recruiting and retention issues that we have seen and we've grappled with quite some time. Those seem to be escalating, and I know there's the pandemic and inflation that play into that. But I do want to just kind of remind all of you that we have been working on compensation initiatives. The Hay consulting firm came in and worked with us back in 2015, and we underwent an extensive consolidation of, compensation and classification practices. We overhauled the entire classification system. There were 5 different components that went into that work. There's a pay philosophy that was created, a compensation methodology, a classification methodology. All of those are currently in place. The piece that has not really come to fruition is the pay practices component of that process. And so we're really here just wanting to highlight all of the work that's been done in the state at the legislative level, agency level, with those numerous consultants and studies, and to bring back to focus the compensation philosophy. We can write all of the policies and give direction to agencies on that, but if it's not funded, it's nothing that's ever come to fruition. And so we have the classification in place, we have the policies, we vetted the compensation methodology and practices we've gone through. We have staff trained at the request of an audit to go through the World at Work certification so that we have certified employees performing the comp work. And now I think it's just looking at the position we're in with compensation. 95% of our state employees are below the minimum, below the market rate of 2017 data. So a very large population of state employees currently below a market that's extremely old. And so we have asked the governor's office and spoke with the JAC about our moderate request for funding that we have asked. It's to begin the step process of just funding compensation rather than lagging, getting caught up with inequities, getting caught up with those that are, continually paid at the entry of the market rate. This first step will get people to more appropriate market rates. We're still behind. It's 2020 market rates, so we're always about a year or 2 behind anyway. So that's our main ask, is just getting pay tables approved that are up to date. With that is the second step, that's then the market merit matrix. And what that does is helps ease the compression and fix some of the inequities that are created. And so that's really the ask at this point. And if we have, we gave the 27-page document. We won't get into here unless you have any questions on the methodology and all of the work the compensation staff under Jared go through to do that. But I'm definitely here just to state our overall reasoning. We definitely valued the input from the state employees, and compensation was an issue for them. A lot of them, maybe not highlighted the most. We know there's other things definitely why employees work for the state of Wyoming. A lot of them just have a passion for what they do and the agencies they work for. And it's our job in the Human Resources Division to make sure they're paid a fair wage for doing that work. And I'll turn it over at this point to any questions. Jared Hansen, he is the agency services manager for the Human Resources Division. He has worked on a lot of the surveys that you guys see, has staff put together the documents and the one-pagers. So if you guys have more detailed questions, I'll turn them over to Jared.
So any initial questions? You got a lot of information that the agency is not going to go through it all. Senator James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So do you think if we were to solve the toxic work environment and get rid of some of the positions that compete with the private sector, that we would actually be able to solve a lot of these problems of the turnover, and we'd actually have more funding available to more wiggle room to raise these salaries for positions that are actually the role of government versus competing with the private sector.
Chairman Barlow.
Please proceed.
Senator James, I just want to make sure, I think I missed the very beginning of that. The beginning of that question.
So, Mr. Chairman, so
Please.
toxic work environment is a big part of government, at least from what I've been hearing from state employees. The work environment is a huge part of turnover, which is why pay is so low. I noticed that the work environment was not one of the questions asked, which is confusing because that's normally something that should be asked is your work environment. Do you enjoy where you work? Do you enjoy the people that you're around and management and that kind of thing? So I was wondering if that were solved, would that help with the turnover? And then the second part of the question was positions that compete with the private sector. If government were to stop competing with the private sector with those type of positions and focus on the actual role of government, that would help out a lot and be able to compensate other positions better. And we wouldn't be running into a lot of these issues.
So Director, I think, first of all, work environment is part of the study. It's on page 7. If you want to look at survey results and those things are on there, there's probably some more narrative type things in there. So
Okay.
certainly if the agency wants to respond to that. And then as far as the type of services, that government provides, that's a policy question, certainly. But anyway, if there's any further follow-up on the work environment type, I think, I guess, framing of the question or the comments.
Chairman Barlow, I
Please.
just echo, I was going to bring up the same thing you did. We did ask questions on the work environment. We specifically asked questions if employees felt unsupported by their supervisors and managers and leadership and that sort of thing. So Senator James, I'd be glad to talk to you a little more in detail on that as well if you have further questions later.
Yeah, just for the committee. So I listened to some of this during the JAC, and there were a lot of discussions. Certainly Senator Grew could weigh in here too, and Director Bach could weigh in here too. But there's a lot of factors that go into this discussion. So Senator Boner, you had a question?
Yeah, sure. Well, my focus, I guess, kind of turns to turnover rate. You know, at the end of the day, that's kind of where the rubber meets the road. And looks like, at least at the introduction, you have the 2011 numbers, you compare that to 2020 numbers. I was just hoping to get just a little bit more in-depth analysis, maybe for the past 10 years, every year, what that turnover rate has been, so we can have some context. And also, I think we all know that finding folks to work for you is tough, no matter who you are, whether you're a government agency or in the private sector. So I think just a little bit more additional context, if there's a comparable analysis in the in the private workforce, perhaps, or just the workforce overall, everybody combined. I think that would be really helpful to give some more context to that very important number. I think that's, like I said, that's what I'm focusing on, is the turnover. Are we retaining people or are we not? And just a little bit more context would be helpful for me to help understand this. So I guess the 2 ways you go about doing that, like I said, every year for the past 10 years or so, if you go back further, that'd be even better. But also if we compare it to the overall turnover rate, or if there's a comparable metric for everybody, not just state employment, that'd be great. Do you have that information? If not, we can, I look forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Go ahead, Ms. Williams.
If you turn to page 10, I believe it is, on the compensation fact sheet that we provided, there is a 10-year history of state government turnover there. And so we definitely have gone up and down over the years. It has been an issue, like I said, that we've really grappled with since 2015, when we implemented the compensation philosophy and the Hayes study, that we've seen an increase in turnover. We also list top 10 high turnover classifications that are continually our lower level, very critical positions running a lot of the state agencies. And those are issues that we're trying with the market merit matrix to get those salaries up and try to get our arms around those ones that keep cropping up as the top 10 high turnover classes and try to fix those going forward. So we're running the numbers and now we see them and we know they're the same thing. We've just never done anything to fix them. So we're working on really addressing compensation in those areas, recruiting and retention issues, to see if we can drive those down. And hopefully our workforce report in the future won't continue to show those same classifications, that we can put some things in place to fix those. And so I wanted to also point out, I know a lot of you are familiar, in 2019, when we implemented salaries, about 80% of the money went to the Department of Corrections, just to the move to the minimum. And that's one of our top 10 high turnover classifications, is the correctional officers. And so we've grappled continually with that. And so we were directed after that, please work with the Department of Corrections so that you're not continually coming back asking for more money. We're putting a lot of money into the Department of Corrections and they're still being paid at the entry. So we worked with the state budget department, the leadership at Department of Corrections, and we implemented a salary matrix in there where they weren't hiring at the entry anymore. Definitely, not a salary that we still think is acceptable. We have a lot of ways to work with that, but we were able to fix that issue. And so I think it was Chairman Perkins at the JAC had mentioned at the last meeting, why is the move to minimum of the correctional officers only $40,000? Well, that would be why. With your assistance and the work we did with the budget division, we were able to fix that at DOC. And so that overall total ask of the 5.3 million, that's the total fund amount to move to the minimum, is really an ask for the entire state enterprise-wide to begin fixing that, paying at the entry, just like we were able to fix at DOC. Now, DOC had their own funding and they have some abilities to move some overtime around, and that's how we were able to accomplish that. A lot of the general fund agencies just don't have that flexibility, and so we're looking to the legislature to assist us in the work that we were able to do with DOC to do that for the remainder of the enterprise. So when we do come in the future asking for salary increases, we're not asking for large sums to move people up who are at the entry. Hopefully we can get that fixed, and then going forward, once we do this maybe a year or two, then we could just maintain with smaller 3% external cost adjustment or something. So I just wanted to point out, the work that was done at DOC is in essence what we're really asking for with that 5.3 million.
Okay, thank you very much, Senator Boner.
And as a quick follow-up, I appreciate you pointing me in the right direction there. And I think it's pretty obvious there's a significant uptick once we started actually cutting back on our general funded agencies. And, but that second part of my question, I think, is pretty important, because you hear the same thing from our school districts, for example. We can't find, it's hard finding people. You hear that everywhere. So I think being able to distinguish your what you're asking for from what everybody else is dealing with is important. And I just point out, I guess maybe this isn't a question, Mr. Chairman, but we have cut our stage fees quite a bit. Other parts of what we fund haven't been cut at all, and they're still, saying the same thing. So I think being prepared to point out the history here is important, and just be able to distinguish yourself from everybody else that's saying the exact same thing, and to a certain extent dealing with the same issues. But yeah, I think it's important that everybody understands that we have cut general funds significantly.
Thank you so much, Senator Boner. That's good advice.
Thank you very much. Representative Stiver and then Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My understanding, and I might be off on this, could you get us, like there's 8s, 9s, 10s, 11s, the classifications? And an 8 starts out this much, so long after this much. Could you get us that copy of that matrix of what that pay scale is for each one of them position?
Go ahead, Ms. Williams. It may be in the materials. There was some scale in the materials, but I don't know if it's that's what he's asking for.
Yeah, Representative Stiver, Chairman Barlow, there's definitely some information on the classifications. I think what we could point you to, and we can definitely talk offline, I can share with you the pay tables that we currently have, and they outline the various levels. I will let you know, though, agencies, according to our compensation policy, can hire employees anywhere between the entry and the market of those tables. So there's not just a set rate, and we don't have a pay matrix that moves employees through consistently by year. So there is some variation within that, but I can definitely point you to the direction of the P tables.
Thank you.
Representative Brown.
There we go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I asked this question during joint transportation directly to the general with the military department as well as the director of YDOT. And I'd be curious to know what it is at your guys' level you're doing here. We hear a lot about pay, and that's an extrinsic motivator. I'm happy to hear that we did hear, that there's public service motivation going in here, that some people just love doing their job and they love working for, the career field that's chosen. What are we doing intrinsically? What are the types of opportunities that we have found inside, wellness programs, the capability of taking an extra day off, here and there? I know that at one point I looked up when I was a state employee, there was the capability of each director having 2 comp days a month. How many directors are taking advantage of that? So it kind of to Senator James's point that we hear a lot about a lot about pay, but what are the intrinsic values that we're doing to try to keep employees here as well? Something that we have totally within our control and that you guys do not have to come to us to implement.
Something totally in your control and you don't need us for it. That sounds like a nirvana. All right, what is it? Go ahead.
Yeah, Chairman Barlow, Representative Brown, there's been a lot of work done within agencies and HRD, specifically with consolidation. I'm geared towards specifically that. I think over the past 5 years, the first thing that's been cut is training budgets, travel budgets. And so things that we were able to provide employees the opportunity for development was one of the first thing that goes when you're trying to cut budgets without cutting people. So we're working with agencies. We're really capitalizing on COVID and the free Zoom conferences and trainings that we can send our employees to. I think we're working for some internal development. I'm partnering with multiple agencies to provide those. Maybe if A&I doesn't have enough money, we partner with YDOT and we hop on board and send some of our employees to their training. So definitely training's a big one. With consolidation, we've been able, the top 5 agencies started an employee, employee assistance program. I said ERP, I was thinking that the employee assistance program. And so we're offering some, work for people if they're having mental health issues, if they would like some financial counseling, various things that they can call the employee assistance program. With consolidation, we were able to renegotiate that contract. And so rather than the top 5 agency employees, we've now been able to get that for less of a cost per month, and that's available to all state employees. So we have worked towards that. What am I missing, Jared? I think flexible work schedules. We've implemented a very rigorous and overhauled the telework policy. So maxi flex schedules, flexing time out if employees need to, and telework has given employees an opportunity for a little bit more work-life balance. So definitely working with agencies every day on some of those things, non-comp related as well.
Excuse me. Thank you, Senator Bouchard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to go back to corrections. And I'd like to have a little bit of back and forth on this here. So would you say that corrections is one of the top agencies that has the highest turnover?
Ms. Williams, do you have that material? Those are in your materials, right? You're going to tell us that?
Yes, Chairman Barlow, let me find it right now. We do have the turnover by agency, so hold on just one second. Chairman Barlow, it might not be in the information. We have a larger report. Okay, so the turnover for Department of Corrections, June 20 to July 2021 is 18.5%. And I would say yes, I mean, DOC definitely is one of the agencies who has some of the highest turnover, but we could give you specifics of all of the, we have a report in the workforce report, and I just don't have that page in front of me that I could direct you to, and it's online as well. So
It's
I
on,
can,
yeah.
it is online. I can direct you guys to that as well.
Thank you. A follow-up, Senator?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I kind of already knew the answer to the question. I think what we're not doing in Department of Corrections is we're not looking at what it costs to retrain people when we bring them in. And so we're not looking at the big picture in the beginning. And there's more than just money, by the way. I mean, when you take someone and they have to guard an area where they're in an isolated area. I can tell you that the people that came in from out of state, that they went back to their state, there's no amount of money when you don't rotate people around and you don't put them so they can, because we're all human. You put somebody in that corner over there to stand all day, they'll probably quit that job eventually because they're not moving. And why aren't we looking at corrections in that way? So we're starting to look at the big picture of what's happening because we're spending a whole lot more money. That 18% turns into big money when we're retraining and putting them back in. Because even when a prison guard comes in that may come from a much more higher level experience prison, come into Wyoming, and we put them on in an academy all over again, right? And so I think that's where our problem is. We could save a lot of money by looking at that program and seeing what we're doing, but I just never, I hear stuff from the inside of people that are very experienced that came into the state and they want to leave because it's not run the way that bigger prisons that have more experience, more inmates. So I think we really need to get really down in the weeds on this, figure this out, because that's a lot of waste.
Mr. Chairman.
Just a moment, Senator Greer. I think I'm going to let the director respond, but just is in your report or in your expanded report, do you have an estimate of the cost of turnover, i.e. in training, to the senator's point? What is there some number that comes with turnover that you can say, look, we could pay 10% more and save money if we had half as much turnover. I mean, I'm not saying that there is a nice nexus like that, but do you have anything? Director Bach, and then we'll go to Senator Greer.
Chairman Barlow, there is a number. It's not as easy as that, but it is significant. I think Senator Bouchard explained that it is significant for each person. We have attempted to try to say, okay, it's $10,000 or $20,000. We can work on that. We are working through that, and we can get that information to you. Kind of clunky, but it's not as easy as to say one number, but it's a significant number. And it depends on the classification as well. So, but I did want to mention, Senator Bouchard, I don't necessarily disagree with you. I think that's a better question for the Department of Correction director, because I'm not sure what they do. I will tell you that the 5 level that goes into the Department of Corrections at WSP makes $17 an hour. That's not enough money, if you ask me. If you look at for all of our information, they can go work for approximately the same amount of money somewhere in Rollins, working retail. So that's a good example of what happens when an officer, a security officer, comes in at a 5 level, working at the pen. So I think it's a little bit of both, but I do think that's a good question for Director Shannon.
Follow up, and then we'll go to Senator Greer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, and I think the discussion that there's 2 things going on here. You've got a corrections administration has so many problems that they're dealing with. So they're working in the business. And then this discussion is about working on the business. So because they're just inundated with all the daily problems that they have to deal with. So this is a discussion, I think, even for this committee to work with you to look at this, because that's where I'm going. We just know I know there's a lot of turnover, and that's the problem. And it's costing a lot of money.
Mike, Senator Greer. Sorry, I need to turn my mic on. Senator Greer.
Yes, Mike, yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too, I understand the good senator's point, but I think it's something that could be taken up with the Department of Corrections. And I look forward to working with him to get the pay increase that the employees need, and look forward to his affirmative vote when that comes up. It sounds like we're right on line, in sync on that one. My question is for Director Bach, and I forgot to ask this question earlier, and it may have been in the material. Cheyenne, a lot of our employees are in Cheyenne, and Cheyenne's a military town. And people get reassigned. A lot of their significant others work for the state. And, we appreciate the fact that it's a great resource for us at the state to have the significant others of our military personnel work for us. But I was wondering, how does that play into the turnover rate? I'm not exactly sure, but I think that would have something to do with the turnover rate in Cheyenne with employees, as people getting reassigned. Do you have numbers on that?
Please
Chairman
proceed.
Barlow. Chairman Barlow, Senator Guru, it's an excellent question. And I just turned to Aaron and said, we don't have numbers on that. It's a good metric to look at, and we will include that from now on, because we do have a lot of folks, maybe they're not in the military, but their spouse is, or their significant other is. And when they have to pick up and move, we've seen that. So that is certainly a metric we should put into our survey, and maybe also try to figure out a way to do it in our workforce report. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question. You mentioned your survey, and when I was at the state before consolidation, there was individual exit interviews, of course, conducted. Oh, so it sounds like we're getting ready to go there maybe. So maybe I'll just shut my mouth and let you continue on.
Please proceed.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Jared Hanson, Program Manager of the Human Resources Division. Representative Brown, you're exactly right. I think prior to HR centralization, a lot of the exit surveys were done agency specific, and HRD didn't have a role to play really with that, other than we got some of the back end data. But one of the things that we're hoping to enhance or make better throughout HR centralization is coming up with more standard questions, more standards period, in terms of what questions asked, how to track that data, because a lot of the responses that our HR were getting when they were surveying somebody when they were leaving the state was, why are you leaving? And the answers they got were simply just for personal reasons. And I think we're at a point where we need to dig a little bit deeper and figure out why people are leaving, whether it's to Senator James's earlier point, it's due to a workplace culture issue or an environment issue, or whether it is due to pay. What are the issues and why are people leaving specifically? So I hope through centralization, that's something that we can accomplish. And I expect that over the course of the next year, that's something that we can maybe report back to this committee and have some more better concrete data than what we have today.
Chairman Barlow, also
Please
in
proceed.
regards to that, Representative Brown, Jared and I have been asked to be part of a consortium of 5 states who also have military bases in their state capital, or that is heavily involved with state employees. We're currently working on initiatives with them to employ the military spouses. But I think on the flip side of that is also looking what turnover has done. And I think now with the implementation of telework, quite a few states are really working with those military spouses, that if your spouse gets sent to another, state or overseas, that some of those spouses can still continue working, maybe remotely, and still contribute to the job that they've been performing. So we'll have an update for you. With COVID, that committee has gotten put on a little bit on the back burner, but I just got, oddly enough, a meeting invite this week where they want to start getting that committee back together, and Jared and I are part of that 5 states. So we can report on that in the future for you as well.
Thank you very much. You got a thumbs up from the Teton delegation. Right. I think we'll go on to our next topic. Anything further on the recruitment, retention, compensation? Senator James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With automatic raises, after what time period do state employees receive the automatic raises?
Director.
Chairman
please.
Barlow, Senator James, there are no automatic raises. The last pay increase was in 2017, I believe. That's where Ms. Williams was talking about the Department of Corrections. So what was asked for, just to remind everybody, we asked for a certain amount and it was cut in half. So we had to figure out a way to give an increase with half the money that we needed to fund the increase, to move folks in the pay plan. So when we say 80% of that the money went to Department of Corrections, that's essentially what happened. And then that rest was split amongst the rest. So there are no COLAs that happen that are automatic. And in the future, this is a very modest ask that we're asking for right now. And what we really need to fix our compensation is $100 million, and we're not coming in for that. So what we would like to do is slowly over time and then eventually get into that COLA to where you do have a COLA increase of 2%, 3%. So to answer your question, there's no automatic raises.
Mr. Chairman.
Follow up, please.
Maybe it was, I worded it wrong. So after, I remember, after a certain time period, state employees receive, or maybe used to, maybe we got rid of this, a longevity pay. Is that still in place?
Go ahead, Director.
Chairman Barlow, Senator James, yes, longevity is still in place. After 5 years, they get a $40 total. That's the total for the month. So they get $40 a month every 5 years. But that is not an automatic like pay increase. It's a $40 amount a month. So if you've worked here for 10 years, your paycheck will have $80 that month for longevity.
Thank you very much. And, all right, thank you.
Well, thank you. Further questions, further questions? All right, Director, where do we go to next?
Chairman Barlow, I believe that the compensation package is the only thing we had on there. Unless there's more questions,
All right.
we can also submit the larger packet if you would like. Senator Guru has seen the large packet for the comp increase. He might let us know whether he thinks that's beneficial. We wanted to make sure you at least had the first 23 pages of that booklet so that you understood what the process was. So if you need the entire booklet, we can do that as well.
Thank you. Certainly, it is a part of the JAC Materials Committee, so if you're interested in having it, but if someone on this committee is interested in it, we'll have them forward it to Ms. Bodewins, and it'll be put in the meeting materials. So is there any interest by the committee of having it in our meeting materials? Okay. If you would just forward that to the committee chairman or to the committee legal secretary, we will, that's not the right either, but Ms. Bodewins, forward that to her, and that'll be posted with our meeting materials and accessible to all the committee members. And Ms. Bodewins, of course, will have a link to that. So I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Representative Brown, you had a question?
I got the Chuck Gray mic. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had a brief discussion with one of the members of appropriations over lunchtime, and I'm just wondering if maybe you can give us a 2-minute scoop of what this actual compensation package looks at doing. Where you guys are sitting right now, I believe it's at the 2015 pay tables. You're looking at bringing it to the 2017, and then there's the 2020 option. There's a lot of stuff here, and to be honest with you, my colleague here to the right of me picked up a packet and looked at the stuff that I have, and he goes, well, what am I supposed to do with this? So I do think that there's some, those of us that have not been watching JAC or are certainly not in the realm of understanding what a state pay table looks like, maybe you guys can give us just a quick, brief 2-minute explanation of what this pay increase is going to mean to the average worker and where we're currently sitting, how far behind in our pay tables we truly are.
Please
Chairman.
proceed, Director, and pass it off as you see fit.
Chairman Barlow, Representative Brown, I think I'm going to take this one because I think it's actually easier to hear from somebody who's not in it every day, because I think that's what you need. We are at the 2017 pay tables currently, looking to go to 2020. That's step one. Step one basically takes the pay table. There's minimum, MPP, and max. State agencies are allowed to hire between minimum and MPP. MPP is the market policy position. So that's their wiggle room. So they can hire in there. Where we got in trouble with DOC a few years ago, they always hired at the minimum. So once we move that pay table, the minimum is now at $18 an hour and we're paying 17. We have to move them onto the table. So the first thing that always has to happen is you have to move the people who fell off the table back into the table. That's the $5 million move. And that's with all funding sources. So general fund, commission fund, other fund, federal fund. The general fund is $8 million of that 5. That's number one move. Then after that, we fund the market matrix. And I know the matrix, I don't like to use the matrix because that's the word that everybody just stops listening because they don't understand it. So what happens is when we did this with the Hay Group back in 2015, like Ms. Williams talked about, we did everything to put it in place, but it was never funded. So we have this lovely matrix and everything works perfectly, but there's no money to fund it. So what this does is gets us to what we should have been doing since 2015. So when I'm an employee, let's just say Representative Brown in your position when you were a state employee, you're aware that everybody gets an evaluation. So within that PMI, performance evaluation, you get a rating of meets expectation, good rating. That's, you're doing what is expected of you. We hired you for a job and you're doing it. There are 2 categories below that, but there's 2 categories above that. Commendable, superior. Most people are in the meets expectation, commendable area, somewhere on that realm. What this does is takes an employee, say Representative Brown, that you have a commendable evaluation, and then looks to where you sit in that pay table. If you're way down at the minimum for your band, your pay band, and you have a commendable, we are going to move you quicker towards MPP or market. If, for example, another employee in the same area, same classification, has a meets expectation, but they've been there for a while and they're closer to market, they're going to move slower. So what we're trying to do is get the people who are paid the least in their classification to move quicker up to a certain percentage of market. That's all this plan does. And it gets us, it doesn't get us all the way. Ideally, if we were to say, the easiest thing for me to do is come in and say, all positions should be budgeted at MPP, let the directors figure out where they pay them. But the budget would be at MPP and we'd never have to look at it again. The legislature would know what that 100 series for every agency would be. That would be easier. That also costs $100 million a year. So obviously we didn't come in with that. We're trying to slowly get there. That also, during the JAC, I also telegraphed that next year we might be coming in for another ask. You know, that's a possibility. But we are simply trying to at least get the needle moved so that we can recruit and retain employees. So it's a 2-step process. So there's sidebars built in there so that somebody who's already making MPP or over, there's some employees that are making over. They don't move like the people who are at minimum or lower.
Thank you very much. Yes, Senator James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So since you're going to be rewarding people that do well and perform above standard, for people that perform below standard, I mean, you're going to get rid of them and get rid of the dead weight.
It's probably not part of the pay scale, but might be management within an agency. Go ahead, Director.
Chairman Barlow, Senator James, folks that are below on the PMI needs improvement. And what is the low one? Sorry. Growth necessary and unsatisfactory. If there are employees who are in that group, they're already in process for discipline and removal. As you know, most of the employees in the state are permanent employees, and there's a process. It certainly doesn't mean that you cannot fire an employee. It just means you have to go through a certain process. So that being in that group automatically puts them in that track, if that helps you. So what I would say is when they're in, Ms. Williams will probably talk about what happens in the pay scale if somebody's in that growth necessary or unsatisfactory.
And a follow-up, go ahead, ma'am.
Chairman Barlow, Senator James, if you look at the packet on page 17, it gives the spread of increases for employees where their compa ratio is. So that's where they are in relation to the market, and also ties in their performance. So if you look at the very bottom, unsatisfactory, you will see that employees who receive an unsatisfactory rating, as Director Box said, they're probably going through progressive discipline or have already at this point been terminated. They'll receive a 0% increase. When you go up to the growth necessary, and a lot of employees who receive a growth necessary, they're struggling in one or two areas, but a lot of those are our newer state employees. They're learning their position. If they're paid the 50th percentile or higher in their market, we will definitely slow them down and they won't receive anything there either. Where they will start seeing something is if they're in the min to the 10th percentile, we will give them about a 2.8% increase, even if they're struggling in a few areas. And that's kind of considered more of a cost of living. It's that 2.8, just getting their salary to a livable wage, understanding that they do have some performance issues they have to work on. They're on a performance improvement plan. So the agency and HR is working with those employees so that they can become successful. So the matrix, the sidebars that Director Bach talked about are definitely built into how the matrix works.
Follow up, Senator?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How often are those employees just transferred to other agencies and pawned off on someone else to deal with it? I've heard of that happening quite frequently. And so with trouble employees that continually perform below standard, those employees, instead of going through that lengthy process that you talk about, the permanent employees, rather than dealing with that, they're just pawned off on other agencies. And so I'm wondering how often that happens. If I know you guys keep records of these actions, and so if there's a history out there of these employees, does that continue in those other agencies? And I'm wondering if you have records of that. Thank you.
Go ahead, Director. Transfers are part of the actual report that you had. It's probably more in the larger report. So transfers could be looked at individually, but go ahead, Director.
Chairman Barlow, Senator James, transfers are in the report. However, directly to that question, I would say that HR centralization has helped with that. Right now, an employee who is applying to another, because that's the only way they could really, I don't want to use the term pawn them off, but I know what you're talking about. So if there's an open recruitment for A&I and somebody applies and they work for DEQ, we are going to call for references and the personnel file for that employee. So I think that is less of an issue than maybe what it used to be. I would encourage, and I have encouraged other directors, and now that HR is centralized, there's a lot more information flowing to say, yes, you need to call over and talk to the other agency and get the personnel file. So, and they can get their PMIs, and the employee has to sign off on that. So if the employee doesn't sign off on getting the PMIs, that's also I would say a red flag for the folks in the hiring committee. So hopefully you won't see that as much as you may have in the past. I'm not sure it was a huge issue in the past, but it has happened.
Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Page 20 to page 28, these tables, is there a narrative I could access on what each of these means? And I understand from 30,000 feet up the pay scales, but is there a narrative somewhere? I just need 2 paragraphs. I mean, I'm a simple person. I know you know that, but just a narrative and what these codes mean.
Go ahead.
Chairman Barlow, Representative Gray, there is an appendix online that actually tells us what are you, and I want to make sure for the class code, what that means, like what is a BAS 04? What do they do? Those are the things that we can get to you and get to the committee. They're like a key. Does that help you? Is that what you're looking for?
It just has to be less than 2 paragraphs, the whole key, the entire key. Go ahead, please.
We haven't done HR centralization yet, right? We're
I
still
think
good.
we do have a little bit of a 4-pager on HR centralization. So yeah, we'll have.
Okay, that's very important to me. So I want to make sure we do that.
Yep. Further questions on compensation thing? So Director, we did get a 4-page document on HR, and I know it's not maybe specifically on the agenda. But if you don't mind just covering that, that would be great.
Chairman Barlow, Representative Gray, yes, we included that, assuming that there might be some questions. So if you have questions specifically on the HR centralization, I'm going to turn that over to Jared and he can kind of give you a summary of where we are. And then answer some questions if you have them. Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Hanson.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray, just a brief summary in the attachment that you have in front of you. When we sat down at the early onset, when we were tasked with this from the governor, we developed a phased approach. We thought that would be appropriate. So you have in front of you several different phases that we've identified. Phase one, what we did was we really wanted to focus on ensuring that our agencies continued to feel supported, and we wanted to mitigate the perception of change that we were undergoing. So we spent a lot of time in collaboration with agency directors, agency HR personnel themselves. Throughout that, we did several interviews to figure out just which positions we needed to consolidate and include with this centralization. I know that you've got some numbers in front of you. We started pre-centralization with 144 positions performing some HR tasks. Now, it might have only been 5% of their job, but we had 144 positions that were performing some HR. Post-centralization, we moved 82 positions from agencies into A&I. And the way where we drew that line in the sand was anyone who was performing 50% or more of their duties came over into HR. Now, through some other efforts, we're not asking that those people that remain, that difference of 62 individuals or positions that stayed at the agencies, they're not doing HR today. All of those tasks have been inherited by current HRD members. So we view that as a huge efficiency. Part of phase one also included consolidating budgets. Just how much money did it take to operate HR in the state? And I know that we're still undergoing some efforts with the state budget department in terms of trying to track and reconcile what those budgets look like, because we got a lot of dollars, and I don't have the exact figure in front of me, but I think part of the issue that agencies were having was a lot of the HR budgets were wrapped up underneath other budgets, like a director's office budget. And so it was hard to delineate what transactional costs were actually HR related versus director's office staff. So we were having issues with just delineating what exactly was HR. So we've worked through some of those efforts with the fiscal agents at the agencies, but we want to have a look back period where we are starting to track, and we have started doing this, what expenses have HR members incurred. So then we can go back to the agencies and revisit to make sure that not too much or not too little was transferred over to HRD. And that kind of wraps up what has transpired under phase one. Phase two with the approach is focusing a lot of our needs on the HRD structure, on the organizational structure, because we've inherited these 82 positions. We sat down with the steering committee comprised of agency HR managers and HRD leadership to develop a structure. And we've actually just had some meetings on presenting what the structure is going to look like. We've had meetings with directors, the entire HR community. And so everybody has an idea of what this proposed structure is going to do and what it's going to accomplish. But what we hope it accomplishes is that we have some consistency in terms of what each agency HR team, what its composition looks like in terms of leveling. We talk about the classifications. We want to make sure that there's some consistency there. But we hope that we can, over time, enhance what the overall HR product looks like. And I don't want to go into too much detail or bore you with some of those details, but that kind of sums up phase two. And then phase three, what we anticipate doing is getting into a lot of the cost savings, because once we can get the structure in place, we can sit down and really start to strip back some of the layers in terms of processes and making sure that there's some standards and some consistency with how things like payroll is handled, or sick leave donations, or a lot of the processes that we have out there. We've observed some inconsistencies that have caused some issues for employees or HR alike. So what we're hopeful to do is that we can sit down and really identify where we're going to find those efficiencies, those consistencies, and streamline some operations through some of those efforts. But we got to get the structure in place prior to being able to do some of those things. Now, once we get the structure in place and we start to migrate in that direction, we anticipate, having positions to cut. I think you'll see that in the packet, that we anticipate having a number of positions that we are going, we are optimistic that, that we are going to be able to give back some positions, which will of course result in some monetary savings as well through these efforts. But what we want to do is make sure that we don't strip back too much where we're putting our agencies in a bad place and they start to suffer in terms of the quality of HR service that they've grown accustomed to receiving. So we anticipate having some of those once we get the structure in place and redefine what HR is going to look like from a statewide perspective. That's a brief summary of where we were, where we are today.
Thank you very much. Questions on that summary? Was Representative Brown, then Representative Gray? Any other? Nope. Start away.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just curious, and it maybe is just a potential conflict that I see coming up in the future, but I look at one of the bullet points underneath too, and it says no agency shall have a single point of contact for HR needs. But then underneath down a little bit next on the page, it says, you know, agency HR employees will have access to more information. So I see the benefit of what you guys are trying to do there, but I also see severe conflict coming in the form of, well, that's not what so-and-so told me yesterday. In the game of telephone where I call customer service and I get one answer one day and then even 10 minutes later, I call and get somebody else and I get a completely different answer. What are you guys going to do to simplify that potential error? I'm sure you guys have got something, but it's still going to happen. So what are we doing to solve that?
Please.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown, that's a really good question. Answer shopping is something we experienced prior to centralization. So I think one of the benefits that we have with centralization is a single chain of command or reporting structure where we have a little bit more influence and a little bit more control to hold people accountable and ensuring that our staff are trained all the same. They've all got access to the same information. They know how to access those resources, how to find it. So I think there's just organically, having everybody underneath one roof, so to speak, will assist with some of those efforts. Whereas before, they might call HRD, but because we were a different entity than what their agency HR was, I think we ran into more problems prior to than what we anticipate post-centralization. Now, to your first point about the no single point of contact, that was something that was really important to us with this structure because we had a lot of agencies that only had one person designated to do HR or payroll. So what would happen is if that person went on vacation or that person was out ill, everything stopped. And so we didn't have somebody who could step in and fulfill that role for the agency while they were out of the office. So that was really important to us as we created this structure to identify teams that could work together to ensure that services continue to be met.
Representative Gray, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So on phase 3 cost savings, it says that through attrition, you anticipate through 2023 to have in aggregate $1.5 million in savings. Obviously, those are compounding per year. You said that that's going to continue to be evaluated through attrition. But what is the target? I mean, I think with the efficiency study, have you reviewed that? I think maybe they said it was 10 to 15 million. Where are we on getting to that estimate in the efficiency study? And do you have a target? I mean, do you think there's an amount? Do you have an estimate of how much this is actually going to save, or is it 1.5 million biennium?
Director Bach.
Chairman Barlow, Representative Gray, I'll have to go back and look specifically at the efficiency commission's understanding of what the savings would be. It was over time for a 10 to 15 million. And I can't remember what that span was, but I will look at it and answer that question specifically. However, target wise, our target is to save money, see efficiencies while offering better HR services at the same time. So there's not a number where I said, I think we can save $1 million a year. I'm not sure what that number is. For example, the vacancy savings that we're saving right now is $120,000 a month. That's what we're saving in the vacancies that are happening right now. When I talked with JAC back in December or a couple times in January, the many times that I was there, we talked about when we were going to see what the actual savings were going to be. And that was this coming spring. We anticipate some of the budget numbers to be adjusted. Part of that is because of federal funding. We had to work with some of the agencies that some of their HR folks were federally funded. We're trying to switch it to general fund so that they can work not only for that entity, but also for others. And we have to make sure we're very careful about that. And the budget department is, department is helping us with that. So we're looking at the spring to work through the supplemental and get that savings dialed in for the supplemental.
Okay, thank you very much. She has a little more follow-up here, maybe.
Yeah. Chairman Barlow, Representative Gray, I think, what we've hit on here is just what we've been able to accomplish thus far with holding vacant positions back and absorbing those duties with existing staff. I think that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg. We have some guidelines for shooting to what the right size number of HR staff is. We can successfully manage an agency of 1,000 individuals with one manager. And right now we have managers managing a 20-person agency, a 200-person agency. So that's what we're talking about through attrition. In the future, when one of those manager positions vacates, if we have a 200-300-person agency, we're not going to refill another high-level agency HR manager position. We're going to move it up underneath another manager till we hit that 1,000 employees under a manager. And then there'll be a structure where they'll have support staff and some administrative staff assigned to that 1,000. And then an administrative HR staff member can successfully, approve PMIs, do payroll for a staff of 250. So as we're right sizing the organization, those are the target numbers over time that then we'll have more positions in the future to offer up. But I do want to say over time, the Human Resources Division, when I first started, was just 30 individuals in ANI HRD. That didn't even include what was going on in the agency. And when I left the position and came to the HRD administrator, we had 8. So there has been a lot of consolidation and cutting of HR over the years prior to consolidation. And I think some of that was cut a little too far. So to successfully operate a consolidated HR, we know there's areas, diversity and inclusion, labor relations, EEOC, workers' comp. We can save agencies money by making sure that they're getting those discounts on their workers' comp and unemployment insurance. Some of the things that the agencies were trying to do, some of them, some were not. We'll be able to save agencies money on those things, but it is going to require us to create another unit. And maybe some of those vacancies we have now, we'll be switching those over from maybe an HR manager to a labor relations team. When I first started, we had a training team of 6 individuals, and now we have 1 multimedia specialist, and we love Matt Nagy, but that's very difficult to run an enterprise training and communications team with 1 individual. So we will be moving a training position from Department of Health that's primarily HR training up under central HR as well. And we may need to add a staff or 2 for those development opportunities that we would like to provide in the future. So we'll also be bringing back some divisions and creating things that we have been unable to do in the state that I think will save us money in the future as well. Right now, Jared's working with a team to where we're going to look at enterprise drug testing rather than all the different contracts that agencies have individually. I think we can save money there. The big savings that we're working on, and I don't know what this is going to look like, but the Efficiency Commission really talked about the enterprise payroll and human resource system. So we're running Kronos, PeopleSoft, CGI through state auditors. And I think their big portion of that 10, 15 million over time had to do with systems. And there's a committee with the state auditor, Director Bach, and the ETS director that's looking at those. So those are also initiatives that we have committees on where we're working not just on the people side, but with systems and inefficiencies like we've been able to do with the employee assistance program.
Thank you. Follow up? All right. Please, Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This might be a different way of asking my previous question. How many more positions do you think you will be able to, as they come vacant, no longer have as they become vacant? See, it's 11 through 2023.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray, in the proposed organizational structure that we've got out there that directors in the HR community have seen, when we assessed that to what was happening prior to centralization and post, we thought that that would be 11 less positions than what it was prior to. So we're estimating somewhere around that number. That's how many positions less we would have. Out of the total, I think we had 95 positions in HRD. We envision this with this new structure, if all comes to fruition as we plan, having 11 less positions over time.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any further questions on the HR centralization? It's a work in progress. Obviously, we're step one, multiple steps to go through. So further discussion. All right. We have a step program too. When we get tired of some folks, we just send them to the Senate. Oh, I'm sorry, Senator Guru. Sorry, Senator Guru. The voters did that, didn't they? Anything else, Director Bach? Anything else, Director Bach?
Chairman Barlow, I just wanted to say I appreciate, I think I've said it a couple times, we appreciate having the management audit as our home committee, and A&I is not the easiest agency to explain to people what we do. It's in the background. We're not up front, so anything that we can do to help you, we certainly can. I know it's been mentioned a couple times. If you have questions, give us a call. We're happy to work one-on-one as well. I know Senator James and I talked quite a bit last year, and I look forward to that. If you have any questions, certainly give me a call.
Okay, thank you very much. You'll have some materials to follow up with us on.
Yes.
And then certainly if the committee has something individually they want, let's try to get it packaged up. Representative Gray,
Thank you.
I think you've timed out.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. One more thing, can we, I feel like Columbo here, one more thing. Can we, with EGI, where are we on the funding of EGI and the situation we had 2 years ago? Obviously, I'll be clear, as the previous administration, not the folks up here currently, but we had a major issue and in my opinion, not handled appropriately previously, and variety of agencies and individuals involved in that. And so is the plan funded now, or is it, how close is it to being underwater again?
So Director, probably help us with the acronyms for the public that may be listening, et cetera, and then go ahead and proceed with the response.
Chairman Barlow, Representative Gray, EGI is appropriately funded. In fact, I will say that the pandemic has helped almost all insurance companies. That is one of the silver linings that the COVID situation created. It was a windfall for many insurance companies, not only health insurance, but all types of insurance. So where we were in a nutshell was a plan that had essentially zero in the reserves. Today, not today, I'll say the beginning of the month, because those are the numbers I look at. We are at approximately 86 million in our reserves. So we're in good shape. That happened between the JAC and EGI working through restructuring the plan. There was no funds dumped into EGI. There were some recommendations that money be moved over to an auditor's office account in order to just in case money. I will say for agencies, if they didn't have the funding to pay for EGI, that money has never been touched. So I would say that we're in good shape. The JAC and EGI went through, restructured a little bit of the plan. And in discussions with the JAC, we have talked about a ceiling and a floor. That is what our policy is right now, a ceiling and a floor for our reserve policy currently. And that's something we're working through with JAC to keep them up to date, informed, transparent, to know exactly what's going on with the plan. So I do not see that happening. Future what happened back in 2018.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. There's nothing further for the A&I, Director Bach, the rest of your team. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time today, the information you've shared with us.
Thank you.
So we're going to keep going a little bit, even though it's been 2 hours. Folks need to take up a stretch. These are some fairly short updates, or one maybe shorter update unless there's a lot of questions from our liquor division. So I see Ms. Henson here, Mr. Montoya. Ms. Bodewins, if I'm missing anything, or you let me know, because I'm just going to march down the, thank you very much, folks. Have a great day. Greetings, Director. Please proceed. Mr. Montoya, welcome. Please proceed at your convenience.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Brenda Henson, Director of the Department of Revenue, and it's a pleasure to be here today. You just heard Director Bach talk about A&I kind of working in the background. Well, you're about to hear about the agency, the division that everyone knows about is the Wyoming Liquor Division and wants to know what's going on at the division. With me today, I have Administrator Tom Montoya. And between the two of us, we hope to answer all your questions related to where we're at today. So basically, it's been 5.5 months for myself, almost 6 for Administrator Montoya. I came on board on August 2nd, and Administrator Montoya came on board July 14th. The last report you had from the liquor division was provided to you on August 4th. I want to give a shout out to Amanda because she wrote a very detailed white paper that basically summed up for this committee what had happened and what needed addressed at the liquor division, what the concerns were. And I know that was a benefit for your committee as well as myself. Coming in on August 2nd, I readily admit I was not keeping track of what was going on at the Department of Revenue prior to August 2nd. And it really gave me a good handle on where things were at. So my thanks to Amanda and compliments as well. So let's get going. Staff from every division at the time that Tom Montoya came on started looking at the system that was in place, the computer system that was in place at the liquor division. They sat down and they discussed every aspect of every task that is completed out at the liquor division and identified the shortcomings that we had and the opportunities that we had. Not only did we include discussions with staff, but we also reached out to our retailers. We reached out to our vendors and got their information. Since day one, that has been the priority at the liquor division. I'll touch on other things that have gone on, but I wanted to address the computer system there initially in our discussions. I'm happy to report that our request for proposals was posted on the procurement website on December 3rd. And the deadline for receiving those proposals comes up this weekend, January 30th. And that is a date that we're looking forward to because it means that we're going to have an opportunity to see how much interest there was in our project. With the proposals being due on the 30th of January, we hope to have the top contenders do oral presentations in winter 2022. We hope to award a tentative contract in winter of 22 as well. And then we're hoping to begin work and start that conversion process and implementation in spring of 2022. Right now, we're in the process of also completing an RFP to acquire a project manager for this. We hope to have that posted on the procurement website no later than mid-February. One thing I want to do before I go any further is express my appreciation and Administrator Montoya's appreciation to the team at Enterprise Technology Services. They didn't have a lot of input historically when the Encompass system is our system that we have today. They weren't included in that discussion, but I will tell you They have been there every step of the way. I specifically want to recognize Donovan Alonso, Ray Brand, and Julie Arp. Without their assistance and their technical advice, we would not have had an RFP that detailed every single aspect of what we need in a system at the liquor division. So with that, again, I want to assure you that prior to moving to a new system, we will do extensive testing. We anticipate having 2 systems running simultaneously until we're absolutely positively sure that the new system that we choose is functioning as it should. As far as our contract with Encompass, it expires on September 30th of 2022. The amount of that contract that's included in our 23-24 budget request is $556,000. The amount of exception requests that were also included in our budget consist of $45,000 that in the original budget process was intended for additional costs for Encompass. Also, there was a exception request for $578,800 where the prior director had anticipated going back to our previous vendor that had our retailer online system and asking them to prop that up again. That's not the direction Administrator Montoya and myself decided to go. So what that means is we have a total of $1,179,800 in the 2023-24 budget to use towards a new system. Now, we also don't have any idea what that new system is going to cost. Obviously, next week we'll have a better idea. So our plan is to look at those proposals, get a pretty good idea of what that price range is going to be. And then we will have numbers to provide to the legislature during the legislative session. And our hope is that we can get total funding for that within our budget. But certainly we want the opportunity to answer questions. We won't have the vendor chosen during the budget session, but we will have a pretty good idea of what those costs will be.
Representative Gray, if you have a question at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to understand here, I know you're talking about how much money you have left for a new system. Once the contract expires in September to the old system, we're not spending any more on the old system, correct?
Mr. Chairman, that is
Ma'am?
absolutely correct, Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Follow-up?
Just to understand these contracts more, was there an enormous upfront cost to purchase this? Was there an understanding that this was going to be around for 15 years, or was it just a monthly or yearly subscription fee?
Please go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray, it was a contract that was entered into that began with the 2-year biennium. We didn't go live with that system until September of 2021, anticipating now that we will be changing systems in September of 2022. So it was one contract for a 2-year time period.
Okay. But
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I think what I'm trying to get at, Ms. Henson, there wasn't some enormous upfront. It was just a subscription amount for that contract. Because if there's an enormous upfront understanding, like we should be able to try to claw that back. And from my understanding, it sounds like there was not.
Ms. Henson, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray, there was no upfront cost. In fact, there were no provisions within the contract to convert the current data that was at the liquor division into the new system. Unfortunately, the RFP process is there for purpose. And I think there were some steps that were missed. There was some, I wasn't there. I don't know what the discussions were. I'm sure they were assured that everything was going to work as intended and the data would be converted, it would be fine. It just didn't happen. And we are struggling with the system as we speak today. We still have things that are not working as they should. So I hope that puts your mind at ease. We paid, if you look at that price, so for 2023, 2024, it would have been about $600,000, about $300,000 per year for that system moving forward. I'm sure you've heard many agencies discuss what their software platforms cost. And we got what we paid for. That's what we got. That's not what we needed. And so moving forward, I anticipate it's going to cost us more, but I can absolutely assure you in the time savings that we have with staffing, hours, doing things 2 and 3 times, and frustration from our retailers and our vendors, it'll be well worth a little more money. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. You have another one? Representative Gray?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Ms. Henson, can you remind the committee a little bit? I think we've talked about this twice, once in the June meeting and then in that August meeting. What did this actually translate into on the ground? I mean, it was basically a supply chain issue, right? Is that vendors couldn't interact with the site and get things in a timely fashion, and it was a nightmare to interact with. That's what it meant on the ground for the most part, right?
Ms. Henson, please.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray, that was a totally separate issue.
Okay.
It really had nothing to do with the software issues that we were facing, but I'm certainly going to cover some of those supply chain issues, and I'm going to depend heavily on Administrator Montoya to share even where we're at today on supplier and product issues.
Mr. Chairman.
Please.
So, Ms. Henson, what did the software issue, the problems, I'm just trying to remind ourselves, myself, and potentially others, what did that effectuate the problem? Was that vendors weren't able to access the site because it was crashed, or what was you had the supply chain issue, but then there was the software issue, and I understand it was a problem, but what did it mean exactly from 30,000 feet up on, high level?
Director Henson.
So I know a great deal about this, but Administrator Montoya knows more. So I'm going to let him recap in a summary all the issues that came to fruition.
Mr. Montoya, please.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray. What had happened is we had a system called Pick to Voice. And basically what that is a cell phone went in a pocket of one of our pickers and they had a headset, and we eliminated all paperwork in the warehouse. The computer just sent them from spot to spot when they were picking an order. Well, that system was owned by Datria. Datria was bought out by Honeywell, and Honeywell informed us that they were no longer going to support it and they were going to do away with that system. That's what really started the issue. At that time, we were on a system called Epicor, and we had been on Epicor for 15 years, and it was dated. It needed to be updated. This committee was told that the system had to keep bouncing. They had to, reboot the system several times a day. Well, that was true while we were on Datria, and we had what was known as the big split line. Many of you have been over to the liquor division. Basically, it was where we did single bottle picking. Director Noble finally shut that down because it was extremely dangerous. It was not cost effective. It took enormous amounts of time to replenish any kind of stock there. And once we shut that down, we didn't have to reboot Epicor time and time again. It was working fine, but it was still incredibly dated. A previous administrator had found Encompass, and it was really just kind of a wash. The dollar amounts for Encompass was really a wash, what we were paying on the yearly maintenance fees for Epicor. That's basically how it worked.
All right, thank you. Anything further about, I guess, where things stand now? Senator Grew, do you have any questions? I know you've been through JAC, but Director Henson, Mr. Montoya, if there's anything further, that'd be great.
Mr. Chairman, yes, I would like to go through a few more things. I would be remiss if I didn't state that when we choose a new system, I am totally understanding that we're still going to have people that are concerned or have, I wish it worked this way, those types of things. But we really believe by including retailers and including our vendors, in this discussion that they're going to be part of this process when we choose a new system. And so we feel that that's an important piece to that puzzle. We also wanted to mention that when we do go to a new system, at that time, the point of conversion, we will be doing a complete inventory of the liquor division warehouse so that we know that the starting point that we have is accurate. So with that, I'll move on to some of the other items of interest that are going on at the liquor division. If
Please
it
proceed.
pleases. So even with the supply chain issues that we had, and we'll discuss those a little bit further, when we compare liquor sales from fiscal year 20 to fiscal year 21, we were up 6.47%, even with the supply chain issues. Over 69,000 cases of special items were shipped to retailers, which is up from the 55,925 of the previous year. It's important to note, even with this system that our retailers are frustrated with, we still had 995 retailers out of the approximately 1,300 retailers that we have in the state that use that system to place over 60,000 orders. That's an average of about 1.2 orders a week. Another piece that was accomplished thanks to ETS, we had redundant internet installed out at the liquor division. That means that from our control, we aren't down at any point. Those retailers have access 24/7. The only time that the system has been down since we got the redundant internet access was when our provider, Encompass, it's a cloud-based technology, their cloud was down. That's the only time we've had an interruption of service for our retailers. So I think that's important. As far as ensuring retailers had product on the shelves for the holidays, Administrator Montoya and his crew succeeded this year. They purchased quantities whenever they could, whenever they had the opportunity, way ahead of demand. The only negative communication that we received back from the retailers was specific to special orders. And if you're familiar with special orders, some of those are very highly coveted, and it really happens each year. It wasn't a unique situation for holiday season 2021. It happens each year. Basically, we have no control over the quantities that we receive from some of those companies. And some of those retailers felt that perhaps the allocation should have been swayed a little differently that when we distributed. But we've got a mechanism in place. We've got a process that we go through to ensure that every retailer that orders a product, if possible, we provide them with some of that special order. And then the rest of it, again, we allocate using a methodology that we've established. If there are other concerns that this committee has related to supply issues or concerns that retailers have, we want to hear about them. So please contact Administrator Montoya if you have a concern. We want to hear about it now rather than later. Another item that we're working on is gathering information from retailers specific to delivery service scheduling. You may recall several factors went into a decision that the division made in November of 2020, where we no longer offered next day delivery. That particular item, when I reached out to the retailers upon coming on board at the Department of Revenue, was something that I had several bring that up to me. So in consultation with staff and with, of course, our trucking provider, because that's a big piece of this, we put together a survey, and that's asking our retailers, which would you prefer? We can accommodate next day delivery, but what we're going to have to do is we're going to have a 9:00 a.m. shutdown of taking orders, and we can't have any changes. That's the only way we can accommodate next day delivery. So we're asking them for their thoughts, asking them for their suggestions. Which would you rather have? 2-day shipment and delivery like we have currently in place, or would you like to move back to next day delivery with that earlier ordering deadline. And interestingly enough, I mean, it's only been out for the month of January, and out of our 1,300 retailers, we've already got 129 responses. So what that means is people care. That's 10% of our customers that are responding to us, choosing, you know, their preference. But the other piece that I think is important because of our discussions with our retailers, there are some that it's not really important to them. As long as they know what to expect, they're okay with either way. So it'll be a lot of information. Again, the deadline is February 1st, and then staff and our trucking company that we have contracts with, we'll sit down and we'll figure out what that solution looks like, and then be notifying the retailers. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about staffing challenges. That probably was one of our biggest challenges when Administrator Montoya and I came on board, and we looked at how many vacancies we had at the liquor division at that time, that July, August timeframe. No wonder we weren't keeping up with demand. We do have the opportunity at the liquor division. We've got 41 full-time employees out there. The governor's office did provide us with funding for 10 contract employees in 2020, and I'll speak to that specifically in a moment. But we also have a contract for temporary employees. The temporary employees are really intended to be for our busy time periods. But unfortunately, over the past 12 months, we've really had to depend on them because of vacancies, because of employees that are missing work because of illness, either themselves or their family. Those staffing shortages really, it doesn't really matter if we have the positions filled or not, we still have work to do every single day. So we really had some struggles there. In our accounting division group, we've got 10 full-time employees. During the current biennium, we've been down to less than 5 working. And so we've brought in temporary staff. I'm happy to report we have 2 vacancies today, but we're working on that. Purchasing had a total of 8 staff. We had some leadership items that we had to address in the purchasing area. That's been addressed. There's 8 full-time employees in that group. I'm happy to report it's totally full at this point. Enforcement, we have 3 in enforcement. Sometime in the future, we'll talk about their workload and possibly expanding that. But for today, that group is full. We have 3 employees in that group as well. Warehouse staff salaries. That's where I really want to provide you with some information. Again, 21 employees in the warehouse. The governor provided funding for 10 AWACS in December of 2020. Unfortunately, we never filled those positions. The AWACS in those positions were funded at a rate of $15.28 an hour. That's what our shipping and receiving clerks wage was, both our full-time employees and our AWACS. We couldn't get applications. You all know we have other distribution centers within Laramie County. We're in competition, and every single day they have signs. In fact, we get to actually see the help wanted signs at the trading post that's on the way out to the liquor division that our employees drive by every day that says that they can make $20 an hour starting wage at their establishment. So what did we do? Well, we had a vacancy position come open. We have 3 supervisors in the warehouse. We had 1 9 classification and 2 8 classifications. When the 9 classification took another job in our compliance section, that left an opening. We reclassified that position to an 8. So now we have 3 8s. All 3 of those supervisor positions are filled, but we use the money that we saved on that position. In addition, the 10 AWAC positions that the governor's office gave us, we filled 9. The money that we saved from not filling 10 positions, plus the money we saved from the supervisory position, allowed us to increase our starting wage for our shipping and receiving clerks to $17.25 an hour. And that was accomplished, and those increases in pay went into effect in November. And I'm happy to say that the warehouse is fully staffed. The biggest thing that could happen, because we had overtime that was going on, we have had staff burnout, but it's fully staffed now. It was fully staffed right after the first of the year. And we have an exception request in the 23-24 budget to move those 9 contract employees to FTEs. Thus far, that has been approved. The governor's office was supportive of that. In addition, so was JAC, but we definitely, we have grown in our product that we sell, the number of items that we sell. We have had 21 full-time employees in the warehouse. How long, Mr. Montoya?
Many years, many years.
I thought he was going to say as long as he's been there, but that's 30 years. He didn't want to go into that discussion. But we really haven't grown in staff size. And so I hope that the legislature finds it in their heart to make those full-time employees. Yeah, other couple of things. I don't want to take a ton of your time. During the COVID-19 reductions, the TIPS program, the Training for Intervention Procedure Services, that's the training that was put into statute in 2003 via House Bill 260. Between 2000 and 2020, there were 37,000 servers trained from all across the state. Right now, 21 municipalities require that training. We've provided that training historically. It was cut. That funding was cut during the COVID-19 budget restrictions. I have asked in an exception budget to restore that $298,000. So that's another piece that you'll hear discussed. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is Administrator Montoya and I met with the task force that was created in 2021. We met with that task force on October 19th. And if I may, I was hoping that Senator Guru would provide his perspective of the committee and their thoughts. He chaired that committee. And at this time, I feel it's more appropriate for him to share his thoughts than it is my perspective. So if Senator Guru would be willing, I'd appreciate it.
Senator Grew, I know your hand's been up there a long time and your arm is probably tired. But if you'd like to provide comment to what the director was just speaking about or anything else in the report so far, please proceed.
Yeah, my virtual arm was tired, but I was just patiently waiting, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. And I too don't belabor this and don't look backwards, look forward. That's what I like to do. But we'll say that the year that our committee met was a trying year. And all I can tell the committee is that Director Henson has a flair for the understatement that I did not really quite appreciate until today. I think if she'd have been around in World War II, she would have just called it trouble in Europe. Because what we were having at the liquor division was a major meltdown, and retailers were whose only ability to get product is to work with the Wyoming Liquor Division, and were unable to get that product. And suffice it to say, they were losing money at a epic rate during holiday periods, busy periods. It was tough. And the system that is still being used today was broken, and the morale was down in the department. It was a bad show. And Mr. Montoya and Director Henson have come in, and while still using that system, I think any retailer will tell you that while there are still issues, now when you call with a problem, there's a can-do attitude about getting product out. The back order and special order problem is while not 100% resolved, is drastically reduced. And all I can tell you is when I went to the warehouse after the leadership change had taken place, I felt like I'd walked into a hostage situation that had just been resolved. The employees were coming over and just saying, boy, thanks a lot. And you're gonna see this place turn around. And it was a complete 180. And I know that now a process is being followed with this RFP that was not followed previously. And I think I look forward to a successful resolution to this and get this system back on track. And like I say, Mr. Montoya and Director Henson deserve all the credit. They have done a heck of a job, and same too with the executive, and Rob Krieger in his office was a big help every step of the way. And like I say, we got a ways to go, but boy, from someone that was there every week, every Tuesday morning at 8 a.m. for a call they were not pretty. It's been a heck of a turnaround, and I really appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Well, we've had some colorful references in that testimony. Thank you. Committee, any other questions? We do appreciate the work that's been done. I know I have received less thoughts from my community, so that means something, because some of my community is not shy about sharing. So we do appreciate that. Committee, anything else? Representative Brown.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I just want to say thank you, because it does sound like you guys kind of came in here and took the bull by the horns and were ready to go. I have also heard some good feedback here in Laramie County from a few of the people that I know locally. So I do appreciate that as well. I know that changing directorship so abruptly and administratorships so abruptly can have an impact on morale. And it sounds like you guys have had almost the polar opposite in that. So I appreciate that work. And I think it's always important to make sure we give credit where credit is due. So thank you.
Chairman Barlow.
Please proceed.
Representative Brown, I really appreciate those comments. But I want to say we need to execute now. We've gone through the initial steps. We've laid the groundwork. It's time for us to show how we can successfully move forward. In closing, I just want to say I look forward to working closely with ETS over the next year. I want to thank Director Vaya and Deputy Director Tim Sheehan for their ongoing support. I hope today we've answered your questions, but I thank you for your time. I know I had mentioned that Administrator Montoya could share some of the supply chain issues that we still have. Perhaps we can do that another time if you're in a time crunch. But with that, I just want to say thank you for your encouragement and support.
Thank you very much. Unless somebody has a very specific question on supply chain things from Mr. Montoya, I think we'll keep going. I don't see any. All right. Thank you very much. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
All right. So we're just going to we're going to come back in at 3:45. So whatever that is, 10 minutes, 11 minutes, 11-minute just break. For the committee, just so you know, I have a 4:30 appointment that I need to attend to. So Chairman Boner, if you would actually I'll just have you take over the chairmanship when we come back from break at 3:45 to Enterprise Technology. I'm sorry, we're a little behind, but we will hopefully be very efficient with your testimony, and we appreciate you being here. So thank you.
So we on that last.
I think the only thing I would say they're quick.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we'll go ahead and get started again for our last two topics. Right now, we're item number 8, right at 3:15, Department of Enterprise Technology Services update. Mr. Vida, is that how you say your name? Welcome, and feel free to introduce any staff members you might be presenting as well.
Thank you, Chairman Bonner and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to come and speak to you today. By way of introduction, my name is Bill Vida, and I joined the state of Wyoming on January 18th. So I'm almost done with my 7th day in the office. I'm serving as your state chief information officer and the director of the Enterprise Technology Services Department. I have with me today Tim Sheehan, who you might recognize as previously having served as the interim chief information officer. And he's currently serving as, and graciously accepted the opportunity to serve as our state deputy CIO and as the deputy director of the Enterprise Technology Services Department. I also have in support Kayla and Donovan, who are members of our senior leadership team in the department as well. We've provided you, as part of the quarterly update, some documentation that speaks briefly to our bios. And I thought maybe, and I anticipate you're very interested in maybe who this person is coming before you to speak in these roles. And so briefly, I'd like to give you a sense of who I am in terms of the management judgment and the approach I intend to take with the position. I've served in a lot of different roles as a technologist. And if you think about the chief information officer role, that's really a problem-solving role. It's a strategic position that focuses on how to use technology to solve problems wherever they might occur throughout government. The director of ETS is really more about the nuts and bolts and the tactical level leadership of keeping the operations of the state humming. And so as the CIO, I'm predisposed in my judgment to view smaller government as being more efficient. Less is typically more. And it's not because of an ideological bent or a political bent, but we all know from our use of technology in our personal lives that typically hardware gets smaller every 6 months or so. It gets to be more efficient, more compact, and capable of doing more things. So as hardware gets smaller, software typically becomes a little bit more functional and efficient. As you've seen through industry over the last 30 or 40 years, more and more automation has been applied to things that had previously been done by armies of people. And so what you view as a technologist over time is that those efficiencies and those economies of constantly shrinking scale apply to the rest of the organizational operations as well. And so the only caveat I would place on that from an organizational perspective is while I am constantly focused on trying to drive economies and efficiencies of scale in IT operations and in government as a whole, there's a break point where the right size matters. And from that perspective, I characterize that just from a practical standpoint is I don't like to spend any more resources than I possibly have to, any more effort than I possibly have to on accomplishing the results and expectations that are placed on us. So when I come before you, I know you've heard some testimony from some of my peers in other departments. It would be my intent not to find a way to grow or to create some kind of large IT organization, but to try to find the greatest economies and efficiencies possible, and to try to build relationships with my peers across government, where if there are economies of scale that we can capitalize on, if there are other parts of government that are able to do the things that are expected of us as well or better, my first inclination would be to try to find a way to build those relationships and capitalize on those centers of excellence for the benefit of the state of Wyoming. So if we come to points where you might challenge my judgment in the future on why I might be presenting certain solutions to you, please know that's my basic inclination. And if there are any questions about that, of course, I'll be glad to provide a little bit more detail. It's day 6.5 So I have very high aspirations and goals. In practice, I have great continuity and asking Tim to stay on. He's been with the state of Wyoming for 12 years, largely with the Enterprise Technology Services Organization. So I'm hoping that our partnership will give us not only the as is, but the to be perspective on where we'd like to take the organization in the future. I'd like to just lay out also what I'd like to accomplish with the Management Audit Committee. I believe in the strongest relationships are built on as open and transparent a basis as we can possibly make them. And so my hope would be that in all the interactions that we have, that you find us to be responsive, that you find us to be accurate, and that we're answering to the greatest of our ability at the greatest timeliness that we can, any questions that you might have. Now, in our particular part of the business, that can be challenging sometimes. Technology is kind of an esoteric topic, and we would hope not to answer in a way that would make consuming our reports burdensome or challenging. Some of the things that I'd like to propose that we do, that we're actually looking at, is as we put information before you, we'd like to give you the opportunity to kick the tires so that pursuant to your interest in any of the information that we'll be presenting, you have an opportunity to actually come out firsthand and ask questions and see things. So by the time these reports come to you, you'll have the opportunity to develop the personal background on that topic. So one of the things we're looking at is creating something called legislator days. These would be things that would correspond with our quarterly updates to you, where we would give you an opportunity to visit any of our facilities, speak with any of our management, any of our supervisory chains, to collect the information firsthand that you might be looking for. One of the other things that we're looking at doing in the spirit of that with our other stakeholders, we know there's a lot of interest in how we acquire things, how we acquire technology, how competitive those processes are, and how well we're sharing those requirements with industry and with other partners that might be satisfying those for us. And so one of the things that I'm interested in doing is kicking off vendor days, where we have an opportunity to give any vendor that's interested in doing business with us, or that might have a service that is going to be satisfying some of our requirements, the opportunity to come in and learn about those requirements in a way that wouldn't create any kind of presupposition or bias in the RFPs when they're eventually released. We believe by giving industry the same requirements and the same opportunities, we should see better results at the end of those RFPs. We are looking at, and so this is something I'll speak to in a moment, but we're looking at the organization as it's currently structured. We believe the best way to get the jobs done and to meet the expectations that you have placed on us and that you're going to be placing on us is making sure that we're structured to meet those demands, that we have the right focus in the right areas to address the things that the committee might throw our way or that the world might impose upon us. And so part of my first days isn't just kind of getting around and speaking to leadership and getting my initial kind of gut feelings about how well we're doing as a team, but really trying to cull out governance more broadly. How well are we doing internally? And then how well are we doing across the board? And maybe as an example of that, we serve 85 agencies. You can imagine if each one of those had the same request for us, how do we rationalize them? If we have substantive groups of requests that are similar, how do we expose that information in a way that incentivizes people to rationalize those? If somebody wants something in blue, somebody wants something in green, how do we create an opportunity for them to communicate that? And how do we as a department catch that so we can find the best way to satisfy that requirement? We have coming up our next quarterly update to you. As going through this update process, part of the feedback that I've received is that occasionally we haven't always served you well. The information that you've asked for isn't necessarily always easy to consume. It's not as transparent as you would like. There might be other information that you're interested in regarding commitments or expectations that may or may not have worked its way into the report. And ultimately, because you're our auditing committee, our home and sponsoring committee, we have statutory obligations that you want to make sure that we're meeting along the way that might not always be easily gleaned from the information we're giving. So one of the things I've asked Kayla to do, who's our legislative manager, is to take a look at how we're reporting all of this information to you to make sure it's in the format that you would like to consume. Things where I think we might need help, just 6.5 day impression. When I came into the job, I was of course given a lot of reading. It's my nature to kind of do a lot of homework. I like to know what I'm stepping into. And as part of the interview process and now as part of the onboarding process, I've been looking at our authorizing statute, the regulatory environment that we're living in. And the last time a lot of those things was updated was 10 years ago. And 10 years is a lifetime in the technology. And so the structure that's encoded within the statute might not be the one that serves us well moving into the future. And so it might not be during this session, it might be in the future after we've had time to deliberate. But please expect that at some point I'll probably be coming back and asking for help on the basic structure as encoded within the statute. As an example, one of the things to consider, and you all know this, I know from the deliberations of the body, there's no requirement for a chief information security officer under the current statute. And cybersecurity, as you can imagine, is ubiquitous and mandatory in life today online. So it's those kind of things. I don't think you want to leave the continuity of that requirement up to the judgment of any individual who might sit in this role. And so we'll be coming back to you to speak about that. Another thing that we currently don't have, and I might ask Tim to highlight this in any comments that he subsequently makes, is we don't have any authority within our current statute to accept grants. And so while grants historically are given to more business function oriented organizations like Homeland Security, there are a number of initiatives that the federal government is coming out with around artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, high performance computing that speak directly to the business of ETS. And right now, if there were funding available for those things, we don't have the authority to accept it or to pursue it. And so those might be things that after we've had a chance to deliberate and come back, we might need your help to change ETS. Before I offer time back, Mr. Chairman, for questions, I'd like to offer the Deputy Director a moment of comment.
Thank you. Members of the committee, Timothy Sheehan, Deputy Director, ETS. I just want to thank the committee's time. Our goal is to be more transparent and open as we possibly can be. And as Director Vida indicated, one of those areas is as we look for those efficiencies and on that last point of, funding that we may have potentially passed up in the past, we are looking for those opportunities and how we can better serve our stakeholders and eventually the constituents of Wyoming. So just look forward to your support and the continued partnership.
Any questions, committee? Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Veda, I appreciate everything that you're going through here. I'll just tell you up front, I've previous directors I've had a lot of discussion with. My particular district houses a lot of public employees, so therefore get a lot of discussions and a lot of questions sent to me about different agencies. Hey, why does this agency get to do this? And one of them, just because you guys are an enterprise, gets to be picked apart is ETS. I actually have an interesting message sent to me just a couple of days ago asking why in the world policies change so rapidly at ETS regarding purchasing anything to do with this exact situation is purchasing anything underneath $500 used to be able to go on a P card. And purchasing divisions never see it. ETS said they have to see now, they have to see everything regarding mice and keyboards. And now it takes a minimum of 45 days for other agencies to receive public input. So it just seems to me like there's some convolution here going in between what used to be good, what's not. Maybe there's some stuff that needs to still be addressed. But if we are sitting and we're keeping other agencies out by 45 days to purchase mice and keyboards, granted, plug something USB in, it could take down the entire system. I get it. But can you explain to me, have you guys thought about a dialogue box between you guys and the other agencies that you guys serve on a day-to-day basis? What can we do better? And what are the areas that you guys see, get that 360 feedback loop? Can you guys expound upon what you guys are doing there?
Go ahead, Mr. Friday.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative Brown. Let me offer from the 2B perspective that that's squarely in our list on how we want to manage those requirements with the stakeholders and how we're going to use governance to drive that efficiency. So I wish I could take credit for changing policies yet. I haven't actually changed a single one personally, but I'm interested in those efficiencies. And generally speaking, and this wouldn't be an answer that I would provide the person who sent the question in, but imagine the computing power you can buy for $500. In my lifetime, any cell phone that you buy is more powerful than the largest mainframe that I used when I started my career. And so it's not a dollar value anymore. It's a risk decision. Anybody's cell phone could be potentially compromised because of some kind of nefarious behavior or inadvertent behavior. And whether that cell phone was $500 or not, the impact on the rest of the enterprise could be profound. So there's a balance I know we're going to have to reach, both in terms of acquisition efficiency and administrative efficiency for the customers who are looking to procure these things, and the other kind of enterprise concerns that you're expecting us to steward. So I know we'll probably be changing policies in the future in the 2B environment. And it's not arbitrary or capricious. It's sometimes hard to find the message to communicate to every person that they might understand that balance. But for the specific instance, let me turn it over to Deputy Director Sheehan to answer.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown, I would ask if that's something maybe we can follow up with offline. I can tell you the policy has not changed as far as $500 or more would go through a review process with the CIO's office. Under $500 can be a P card purchase. What I would say the exception there is, say they bought a quantity of 20. So that unit cost may have been, $50. But, now it is over that $500 threshold because of the quantity or the total cost. It would go through that review process. That's just understanding the details so we can answer that appropriately.
Again, thank you. Again, new mics would be great. So I do certainly recognize I'm getting one side with very limited facts, and that's why this is not necessarily in any way, shape, or form an attack. But certainly it seems that when something like this happens, somebody's used to something going their way, and then all of a sudden it takes a right-hand turn and they're about faced. But one of the other questions that I have is going to be surrounding something that you had just said, and it escapes my mind now. So you said something at the end of your comments, and if I can remember it, I'll come back to you. But it is interesting that, you look at the unit costs, that kind of stuff, but it seems like this was a very particular instance. So I would like to follow up with you if we could.
Absolutely.
Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Two things that I would like to ask. I know you're on day 6.5 here, but two priorities that I'm personally really interested in, want to relay is one, the IT centralization. I mean, centralizing all these IT positions, just like we are doing with HR as part of the efficiency study, and achieving through attrition savings through vacancies. I mean, and I'm a simple person. I know it's a simple concept, but I think that is the way to go in some of these areas. And we've identified HR as one area to do it. IT is another area to do it. And we just need to follow that from T to green and identify the savings. And every time one of those vacancies comes up, identify whether that position needs to be filled. The second thing is all of these requests that we receive for IT systems. It is never ending and they're huge. And every agency has a separate one and they all want these Corvette systems, but it's a different brand of Corvette. We don't need to have every agency having their own system. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why this enterprise agency was created, was to coordinate that. And it's not happening. I mean, even on management council, LSO wants to have a repository for their documents. I mean, it's every single agency. I mean, really, why can't we identify one and have different nodes so that each is locked off, so different agencies aren't seeing it, but we've got one and it meets our needs. Or maybe a variation of 2 or 3, but not 30, not 40. And not all of them rolling into the legislature on separate timeframes for new requests. That's a really difficult thing to untangle, but it's one of the things. The second thing I'm hoping personally you look at during your time as director. Thank you.
Would you like to respond to that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative Gray. I wholeheartedly agree with everything you said. I've built a career on consolidation and transformation. And one of the things that my personal sensors are tuned for is how well that consolidation worked. It's 10 years ago that the idea was implemented and it's moved over time. And in my experience, the aspirational goal of the consolidation is to behave exactly like what you've said. Depending on the leadership and the continuity of that decision-making, it's not uncommon for people to be thrown together, but the actual organizational behavior might not have reached that aspirational goal. And kind of symptoms of that would be everybody sitting together, but the same IT people who did the same old job keep doing the same old job. So those fiefdoms maybe that they had invested their careers in, or the organizations had invested in them, might not be permutable. They might be under some new management, but they're essentially doing the same thing. And another symptom of that is how strong governance is. Do you have an ability to rationalize all those different requirements that are coming in a transparent way that helps build support for finding those 1 or 2 platforms that do all these things, rather than 85 different platforms that every organization needs? And you can see if that's happening by how requirements are coming into an organization. If they're coming in the old way, so everybody has their go-to person in ETS, or are they coming through some kind of a coordinated front door that gives you the opportunity to make that judgment, to find that common solution and make it happen. And so after 6.5 days, I wish I could tell you I have observed enough to be able to assess how that consolidation has moved through time here in Wyoming. But just know that I am looking at that specifically. And part of the way I hope to solve that is through governance. And part of the way I hope to solve that is through our workforce strategy. I view every employee that we bring on as being a 40-year investment. And so incumbent in the judgment that we have to bring before we hire anybody is, will we need that person over time? Is this something that has to be inherently governmental, or is it part of a technology trend that we might have to live with for 5 years or 3 years or 7 years? And then at the end of that day, we're not going to leave that. We're not going to need that role or function anymore. And so part of that is trying to find a way to assess what skills we have on board, if they're the kind of skills that are fungible enough that they can be developed into what we need sustainably over time, and what things do we want to keep doing as a government or otherwise push out to the vendor community to satisfy for us. Does it make more sense that because the vendors can do it better, faster, cheaper, and they'll always be able to do it that way, do we need to invest in those kind of people to continue our operations? And so part of what I'm doing now, of course, is meeting with everybody and trying to develop those assessments. But my sense is, from what I've seen already, there are improvements in governance that we need to make in building those relationships and that openness and transparency. And part of that is taking a look at our current skills inventory and figuring out what kind of workforce development investments do we want to make, do we need to make to sustain that inherently governmental support over time. And I'm hoping to keep that dialogue open with you, sir, because it's as interesting to me as I know it is to you.
Any further questions, committee? Okay, well, thank you for the presentation. Appreciate your input and welcome to ETS.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Any public comment, either in the room or online? If you're online, go ahead and raise your hand. Looks like nobody. Hey, any final comments or questions for ETS? Hey, seeing none, we'll go on to our last topic here with staff that we went ahead and started a little bit before lunch, but we'll go ahead and continue the conversation. So if I remember correctly, we were talking about the status of the state contracting evaluation, which is ongoing, but we also have to prioritize the staff's work when we look at other scoping papers that they're currently working on based off of committee action last August. We also have a list of other potential topics committee. So the way I understand this is that we might have to prioritize if the committee wants to continue with our decision between the economic development tools and property tax assessments. Might be beneficial to maybe take a quick vote, which one of those we want to prioritize for the scoping paper. But also want to open up for committees or even members of the public. If there's another topic we want to have staff address, that now be the time to be thinking about next interim and what processes we want to get going. So a caveat is that we can't just keep on adding on. If we're going to add a new topic, we'll probably have to take another one off if we want to effectively prioritize here. So that being said, I guess Abigail, do you want to provide any updates? Anything I missed there as far as those two scoping papers? I understand that work is in progress and we can expect something more, I guess, progress hopefully next summer. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. Currently with our staffing in the research division, half of my staff are working on the evaluation. So we're supplementing the others standing or interim committees that we staff with the other 3 staff members. And so once we get those, the white papers for judiciary, corporations, minerals, once those are wrapped up, I will have that staff start in on one of these scoping papers. So if the committee has a preference as to which one gets done first, that would be helpful for me to know. The other 4 items listed there are probably not so much scoping papers, but they were listed as topics the chairman had received from other committee members that had expressed interest. And if the committee wants to have a discussion of what might be an appropriate interim topic, those things aren't really items that my staff would provide, but rather agencies coming in like we had today.
I gotcha. So it's good to have that, I guess, preview of what the next interim may be like. Committee is a little bit different. Now we're not a standing committee. We're not going to be focused on whatever bills we sponsor over the session. So it's a good time to have this conversation now. So any discussion committee on potential topics, and like I said, it might need a motion or something to prioritize among those 2 that we have: economic development and property taxes. Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On this property tax assessment one, it's one I'm quite interested in. We've had problems in Natrona County that have identified things that could happen in any county. It's not just a Natrona County potential issue. It's deficiencies in our state statute and what happens when an assessor when there's a lot of appeals, basically, and what that interaction is with the State Board of Equalization. Right now, we've got a system where the County Board of Equalization sides with the taxpayer on an appeal, and the assessor refuses to listen. It's remanded back to the assessor. The assessor decides what they want to do with that. Assessor says, nope, we're gonna kick it to the State Board of Equalization. And every time the State Board is siding with the assessor. So what I want to understand is what the State Board of Equalization's processes are, what the assessor's processes are they being followed in statute? I mean, we have cases, I get calls daily about the requirement statute for properties to be visited on a ROTA. I believe it's 4 to 5 years. And the amount of time they're spending on these properties, it doesn't make sense. I mean, when you see how much time they say they're spending reviewing each property. So there's a lot of things in the statute with the property tax statutes and the Constitution that I think could be in a paper that would yield some momentum to getting some fixes, because this could happen anywhere. It could happen anywhere. There are deficiencies in the statute that have been manifested in Natrona County because of issues that have happened with the assessor there currently, but it could happen anywhere. And I think it would make a good topic. Thank you.
Representative Sherwood.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to refresh the committee about throwing this idea of doing an assessment of our economic development tools out on the table, and why I think it's a priority is, as state funding becomes scarce, what the Wyoming Business Council has to work with in their grants and loans is less and less. And then we're turning to communities and saying, how are you helping yourselves? Like, how are you pulling yourselves up by your bootstraps and helping grow your local economic development efforts? And I would say the majority of the tools that are available to us are not right-sized for the size of our communities. So you'll see in the paper that I provided to you that was developed by Holland and Hart and Ayers and Associates. It's this little handout, and I will happily email this to everybody. It's just a summary of the TIF and the mill levy, what organizations are able to use it. And you'll see in the notes there that really Cheyenne is the only community being able to utilize these tools. This paper doesn't cover the return on investment for tax exemptions or new market or historic tax credits, which is often used as a development tool, venture capital funds. It doesn't look at whether or not we're utilizing federal funds for economic development. I mean, so this could be very broad, but I think what we decided at our last meeting was to not include the Business Council because that's something that Mineral's covering, but looking at the other tools that are in statute that I've heard from constituents are confusing to navigate. And so again, our communities outside of, say, Cheyenne, Casper, this is a tool in the toolbox. They're being asked to use it. When they go to pick it up, it's broken. So I would just like for us to be able to look at and assess how we might clean these up in statute, make sure that they're effective and efficient, and that we're allowing our communities to utilize every single economic development tool in the toolbox to better diversify our economy. So thank you for your consideration.
Any further discussion? Senator Bouchard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm wondering, are the tools here to raise taxes?
Chairman, these tools allow communities to put initiatives on the ballot. Right. So you go to the taxpayers, you go to the citizens and say, do you want to make these economic development improvements? Sometimes those are road, sewer improvements, and it allows the communities to ask their constituents to vote. So it's not taxes that we're raising. It's a tool that we're asking communities or telling communities they could use, but they're mostly ballot initiatives.
And perhaps it's part of the discussion could be how often do those propositions pass, how often they fail, and it's yeah, I think that anyways.
So similar to the lodging tax, right? So the voters have to approve that.
Anyways, any further discussion, committee?
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
I mean, I'm reluctant a little bit, but just concerns me to see this document by an organization that lobbies. And when I looked at what your day job was, that you work for the same, I mean, you work for someone who benefits with this. Do you not work for them anymore?
I work, so Mr.
ahead and
Chairman,
address
I
the
work for a
chair.
nonprofit. So I work for a nonprofit who does economic development. I would not directly benefit from any of these resources. My communities would, your communities would.
Okay, so the task here is to focus on prioritizing one or the other. So I think best to focus on that. That's the discussion. Senator Guru.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You just the words right out of my mouth. I just, that was interesting. I too think that having a good conversation about what right now, economic development is something that is on everyone's mind. How do we get our economy moving? And so I think a wide ranging topic about a discussion about that would be beneficial. I think they're both good topics, to tell you the truth. I really do. I think the whole tax thing is, I think we're talking about 1 and 2, what we should do first, what we should do second. But I do appreciate the chairman's comments about keeping on the issue. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Okay, Representative Gray, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to ask the LSO as the first priority to move forward with, outside of the contracting evaluation, move forward with the scoping paper on property tax assessments, the relationship between county assessors, the State Board of Equalization, how the County Board of Equalizations are trained. I've heard a lot from Natrona County that they're concerned about those materials, and also what the interactions that assessors and the State Board of Equalization take with state statute, and whether how they're interacting with state statute, and whether that is actually occurring correctly, which is an appropriate role for a scoping paper. And then I also moved that the second priority be the use of bid waivers among agencies as a scoping paper. This has been a problem for a long time. I don't know if they'll have time to get to it, but I think that we should prioritize that. That's second.
Hey, there's a motion. Is there a second? Representative Stivar. Any discussion on the motion? So basically 2 parts. One, the first priority for the scope of the paper is to be the property tax assessment. The second one being the use of bid waivers. Is that be a separate scope and paper? Is that correct?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if I could clarify, because we haven't talked about bid waivers yet. This is specifically an agency waives its competitive bidding process. It is somewhat I think with the contracting evaluation, but I think it's a nuance that might come out of that as a scoping paper. So it could actually fit well as the second priority, I think, and might not be the exact thing they're covering in the evaluation, but might be an offshoot like some of these other things we were talking about earlier.
Okay, so just to be clear, this would be separate from the actual contracting evaluation. Would be a kind of subpart of the what we're already doing with the contracts, or?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, it would be. And this is a prioritization listing. So, evaluations first, then the scoping paper on the property tax. And if they have time, then the use of bid waivers, that question there on contracting. And so that would be, I guess, the third priority would be that bid waiver issue.
Okay, all right. Any discussion, committee? Senator Drew, or?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I kind of thought the contracting evaluation and the bid waivers amongst agencies with contracts were kind of part of the same thing. And also, I'm sorry, maybe I missed something, but I guess I thought those 4 were, we heard from staff were talking about things they were going to, maybe bring agencies in and talk about, and that we were talking about the first one was being done. And I think that was that nuanced part that the bringer was just talking about. But then the others we're going to bring in agencies and talk about it. I'd like to hear about Medicaid fraud and efficiencies and care funding and all that. But whether you go with tax assessments first or development tools after that, or the other way around, either way. But I thought we'd keep it to that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any further discussion?
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Representative.
Hi. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also think that the property tax assessment is a very valuable topic for us to cover. And if it would be amenable to the committee to put that ahead of the economic development tools, I could support that. But I'm gonna push that we look at our economic development tools as part of the staff directives. Thank you.
Representative Stiver.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Medicaid fraud, we need to know, I'd like to add that in to the second or third one, if I could. We need to know how much Medicaid fraud is happening in this state. And I asked that question the first meeting and got shot down. If you go back and look at it on a incident that happened up in the Camel Country. That is an important thing we need to look at.
And so just make sure I explain that properly. We do have to pick basically one topic to prioritize. That's what we're discussing here. I'm not saying the other ones aren't important. We couldn't bring them up as an interim topic, but the motion is on, what Representative Gray said, it had nothing to do with Medicaid fraud either. So just make sure we're staying focused here. Representative, you have a follow-up?
I apologize.
Okay. Representative Gray, you have anything?
I think Senator Brewer wanted to go.
Okay. Yeah, he's shaking his head. Do you have anything to say, Senator Guru, or? No. Okay, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman. I'd like to put out there, I mean, I think bid waivers are a key issue, but maybe that Medicaid fraud should replace the bid waivers as the second priority or the third priority. The third priority, if you include the evaluation, the second priority, if you're outside of the evaluation. So it would be evaluation on contracting, then property tax assessments, then Medicaid fraud. So Medicaid fraud versus bid waivers. I do think the Campbell County experience could what happened on Medicaid fraud there, we could ask staff to look at the statute, see if there's something we need to strengthen there and what the story is there. I mean, I've read about it in the paper. I've heard a lot about it from the delegation. But I think it would be helpful to get the whole story. And so maybe that's, if they do have time, to move that into the third slot. So it'd be contracting, evaluation, property tax assessments, and Medicaid fraud. Just wanted to ask Representative Stivar and some of the other individuals if he thinks that. I mean, they're all, bid waivers important, but maybe we move that down to a priority for next year.
All right, so are you adjusting your motion to
Well, I
eliminate?
want to get his feedback first.
Okay, all right. Well, he is the second and you are the mover of the amendment, so you could change it if you want, if the second's agreeable. But anyways, Representative Stivar.
I'm agreeable that the property tax assessment is important. I've been looking at things on that too. So, yeah, I'm in agreement with Representative Gray.
Mr. Chairman, so I'll go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Apologize.
Yeah, go ahead.
Need to talk over you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll go ahead and amend my motion and make it so that of course, the first priority is the evaluation, the audit evaluation on contracting, which is probably going to cover bid waivers anyway, like was said earlier. And if they want to do an offshoot on that, they can do that. And then the second priority would be the property tax assessment scoping paper, and then move into the third, if they have time, that Medicaid fraud question. What happened in Campbell County? I believe it was $1.5 million that was in question. Is there something we need in statute that might have prevented this issue from happening? And then also where we are at with Representative Stiff's bill from 2 years ago on Medicaid fraud. That is still in place, that program. And so want to see where that is, that program to address Medicaid fraud. And I think a scoping paper on that would be appropriate as well. What the savings that have been effectuated on that and what's been revealed there. So that's what I'll move.
Okay, so to be clear, now the motion, since the second is agreeable, is to remove the bid waiver topic and to replace it with Medicaid fraud. Is that correct? Yes or no? So we can be clear.
Yeah. I mean, I
Okay.
think bid waivers are important, but let's go ahead and look at that Medicaid fraud, especially because it's already being covered by the contracting.
Well,
I think,
in fact, I don't think it is. That's why it's separate. So we might have to make a decision. We're making
Well-
prioritization decisions. We can't just say do everything. Oh, so
Okay.
that
so
defeats
can
the
we,
purpose. Just like
can
that
we-
defeats the purpose of the discussion.
well, I understand. Can we ask Ms. Bedouins, are bid waivers really being covered in this evaluation? Or is that, do you think, an appropriate separate scoping paper?
Ms. Bedouins have already answered the question, but apparently you can answer it too. So.
Mr. Chairman, you're correct that the contract evaluation, we're going to get in, there's a gray area between the procurement and contracting. We're going to get into that negotiation side, but at that point, you're already going to have gone through the procurement process needed to get there. So the bid waiver is outside of that. This topic was, what we were envisioning was not so much a scoping paper, but a research paper that looked at how often, what agencies are using these? Are any agencies using these more frequently than others? And that would help the committee then identify if a particular agency should be audited in terms of their use of the bid waiver. So it's a kind of a stepping stone to a potential audit to even see if there might be, if there's any issues out there. Hopefully that helps clarify.
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
So I'm gonna go ahead and go with my original motion. Valuation on contracting, 1, property tax assessment, 2, bid waivers, 3rd, and the next year we'll look at things like the Medicaid.
Is that agreeable to the second? Representative Star, can you express
What
whether
do you
that's
wanna do?
agreeable? or
Yes,
not?
go ahead.
Representative
I'll accept that.
All right.
Okay.
I'm gonna go with the Medicaid fraud number 3, okay? So we got the scoping, the evaluation number 1 on contracting. Number 2 is the property tax assessments, and then 3 is the Medicaid fraud, okay?
Is that agreeable?
Acceptable.
All right, let's do that.
Okay. Final answer. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, that's a change from the motion. What I had written down was 1 contract, 2 property tax, 3 bid waivers. And that got us the agreement on the second. But now I'm hearing,
Yeah, we literally just changed it about twice in a matter of 20 seconds. So now
Perhaps
it's
I could-
back. The second priority is Medicaid waiver again, I think. So
well, I was going to offer up Medicaid fraud is not something that my staff have to talk about, at least to begin with. You could have the agencies come in and still do that at a meeting without putting staff resources into it. So it might be a way to do both.
okay. Does that make sense? It's more of a interim topic type approach. And so like I said.
Well, Mr.
committee,
Chairman, I mean, it's the 3rd.
Yeah, excuse me, Mr. Gregg, please, let's respect each other here. And so the original discussion, like I said, was we're trying to prioritize the scoping papers, which we already authorized at the August meeting. And so we're getting a little off topic here, and that, this is not what the direction we gave staff months ago. It's really, I think, very poorly thought out to just change it at our whim. When we've already given them the direction. The purpose here was to prioritize one over the other. And so just so we're clear, I'm sorry I didn't make that absolutely clear. That's where we're looking, is to prioritize one scoping paper over the other. And we're going to have Medicaid fraud next interim, no matter what. So just so we're clear, we're going to be taking up that topic. If it's assigned to us, I imagine it will be after all this discussion. So anyways, Representative Grew.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Wow. On and against whatever the motion is. Once that, I agree with you. It's just, we're changing here. It's just talking over each other. Just vote no. Thanks.
Go ahead, Mr. Gray.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I really don't appreciate the previous commenter. I haven't talked over anybody. You just asked for the chairman to call you up, and him continuing to question my intentions is really unnecessary. So I think the motion is the motion of the priorities, and we're having a conversation right now. They haven't started either of the papers, okay? So to question the intentions here, I think is really, really unfortunate and is inappropriate for this legislature. You know, neither of the papers have been started. There's a list here, and on the list was property tax assessments, the economic development question, Medicaid fraud, bid waivers. The motion was to pick two others, and that's what we did. We had a conversation on what the third was, and it's been a positive conversation until some of the last few comments. So there's no confusion. We're just having a conversation about the different ideas, and so the current motion on the table is to have amongst the scoping papers, priority one, property tax assessments, and priority two, the Medicaid fraud. Thank you.
Okay, any further discussion? Okay, looks like we've discussed that enough. Go ahead, all those in favor, please raise your hand. Keep them up. That's 4. All those opposed, raise your hand. That looks like it's 2. So that motion carries. Any further discussion? Okay, looks like we're adjourned. See you next interim.